All right. How was your lunch break?
Alright.
Good.
Much needed, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah, there's so much information in this. It's good to get some good breaks in.
It's just that sometimes things get repetitive. Sometimes it's been a month already since I finished the first part.
Yeah.
I've been like dreading it. Oh shit, I gotta do part two. I
Yeah.
gotta do part two. And then, oh, I gotta make the food safety plan.
Mm-hmm.
Small things which are easy for me to do, it's okay. I could do them very fast. But this
Yeah.
is something like, I really don't want to do it.
Yeah, I
You
get
know?
that.
Okay, so,
The dreaded experience. I'm with you, honestly. Building food safety plans is hard, and so it's so much work. Um, yeah. Sorry you're having to do this. Oh,
okay, no problem. So let's go from here.
let's go from
So,
here. We'll get you through.
yes.
Okay, so we just went through table A17 for EG Food Company's cheese supplier, right? So they
Yeah.
would have to do that table for every single one of those ingredients. And then they use that table for their own process. So that's why they're showing the flow diagram again. So if we look at EG Food Company's process, there are a few areas where there are potential hazards. So the first one, if they don't cook the omelet all the way, then pathogens could survive. So that first one is a yes. Uh, if there's temperature abuse, if the omelet, maybe it defrosts, it gets too warm for too long, or after they cook it, maybe they don't freeze it quickly enough, there would be potential for growth there. Then they're adding the cheese and the biscuit after the omelet is cooked, after the egg is cooked.
Mm-hmm.
So they could introduce pathogens with the cheese or the biscuit because both of those can definitely harbor pathogens. Uh, then their product is exposed to the environment after the kill step, but before packaging. So we do have to worry about environmental pathogens. And then undeclared allergens is a yes for them because they've got, the egg, the milk, the soy, and the wheat. And then allergen cross contact is a potential issue because their assemble wrap area, they put together all their products in the same area. So if they're not careful about cleaning and sanitizing and scheduling, that could be an issue. And then the last piece that's a potential hazard for them is the metal. So they've got a wire whip that has a history of breaking. So there's potential metal there. And they could also potentially have metal from the cheese manufacturer or the biscuit manufacturer because both those products get sliced by those manufacturers.
Right.
Okay. So now that we've identified potential hazards, we have to evaluate them. And by evaluate, what I mean is we're deciding do they need a preventive control or not. So this is where we think about severity of illness or injury, likelihood of occurrence. Do we have a product exposed to the environment and it's ready to eat food? And any finish factors. So, again, some of this is really repetitive for sure. I will try to keep the repetition to a minimum. When we think about the severity of the illness or injury, one of the things that we have to think about is like how long could it last, and then could somebody develop an issue in the future because of it. So if I get an E. coli infection, there's potential that down the road I have kidney issues. Or if I get a bad salmonella infection, the salmonella could potentially like bore a hole in my intestines, and that would definitely cause me issues in the future. And then likelihood of occurrence, we've talked a lot about like the different pieces of our facility and what happens there that could affect the product and what does our customer do with their product. We talked about where we find information. So that information will help us think about how likely this hazard is to happen. We talked about customer complaints and lab testing, and we talked about environmental pathogens. So now that we've gone through are potential hazards, and we're thinking about whether or not they need a preventive control. We're going to talk a little bit about the different kinds. So, we have the process, allergen, sanitation, and supply chain. Those are our four main preventive controls. They have a category other. They say recall plans count as like other preventive controls. You might define something as other in your system. I haven't really found too many companies that have that. So these are lots of different examples of different preventive controls. Like we talked about, cook steps for biological hazards, time and temperature also for biological hazards, and formulation. And then supply chain programs for hazards that we can't control, like the mycotoxins or the pesticides. Um, you talked about your sanitation for preventing contamination. For a lot of chemical hazards, including allergens and pesticides and mycotoxins and colors, all sorts of things, we may be relying on a supply chain program. Um, Allergen labeling, sanitation for allergen cross contact, and then you don't have these in your system that I know of, but a lot of companies use filters and metal detectors and magnets and x rays and all kinds of things. So these are just general examples. There are some exceptions to when you would need a preventive control. So, say I am selling raw coffee beans, green coffee beans. I know that those coffee beans cannot be consumed unless they are processed by somebody else, right? So that if there were any pathogens on there, they would have to be roasted for somebody to drink the coffee. And so I know that downstream somewhere, someone else is going to control that hazard. If I know somebody downstream in the process is controlling a hazard, I need a written assurance from them. So, say you are selling to another manufacturer, you would just get written assurance from them that they're controlling the hazard. So, for your example, for your flour, your supplier might ask you eventually for documentation that says, I'm cooking this flour to control for E. coli. There's a possibility.
Oh,
Yeah. Um, it doesn't particularly apply in your case because you're selling to other wholesalers, but like nobody's processing your product further.
right.
Yeah. We're going to walk through a couple of examples from EG Food Company's hazard analysis. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because we would be here for a million years and you'd be
Yes.
bored out of your mind. So,
Right.
if you see anything on here that you have questions about, just let me know. But otherwise, I'm just going to talk to the ones that are important.
All right. Go ahead.
Cool.
Just okay. Another question for you.
Yeah.
So I understand that I'm taking this course from you, and you're not liable for anything.
Mm.
Do you do something on the side as to whether to help people on the side to make up a food plan?
It's something I've considered as a potential side business. It's not something I've actively done yet. Usually, when I build food safety plans, it's for the courses. Um, but yeah, it's not a business I am actively doing right now.
Oh, I see. So it's like, what I'm thinking is like, for me to get a help from a big company, how they want so much money.
Yeah.
It's like I will be the one with the with the license. I just need somebody to put the paperwork together. So
Yeah.
this way my life becomes easier, and then we I could make changes with them and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I mean, the thing is, so this way my life would become easy, and
Mm-hmm.
then once a week, yes, I gotta fill out the paperwork saying, oh,
Yep.
we did the validation, we check everything.
Mm-hmm.
Once a week, I fill out the paperwork, and that's it. I keep that paperwork on file,
Yep.
or I teach somebody else to do it for me under my guidance, and that's it. Then
That's it.
I should be okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I don't know, something for you to think about if you're interested. Let me know. All
Yeah.
right.
I'll definitely think on it for sure.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So let's start with the pan release oil. So the EG Food Company, they buy a soy lecithin spray. The soy lecithin does cause an allergic reaction. So the hazard is undeclared allergen soy. They decided they do need a preventive control. In this case, the control, because the soy is in all their products, just like your sesame will be, the control is just labeling. So they,
Okay, yes,
yeah,
control will only be labeling, yes.
yeah. And EG Food Company has two allergen controls for their labels. So one is when they receive the labels, they check to make sure it's correct and has, it says contains soy and egg and wheat and milk. And then the other one is when they put the label on, they make sure that they put the right label on the product and also that it has the allergen warning again. Um, and that secondary check is very critical for sure for a lot of different reasons. You could have misprints, you could have pieces of the label cut off, right? Or like, yeah, lots of different potential things to go wrong there. So we are looking at the ingredient, and the control happens at the label step. So in column 6, we say no, the control doesn't happen here. The next one we're going to look at is the biscuit at the bottom of the page. So for the biscuits, the first hazard they list is recontamination with environmental pathogens, specifically salmonella. And the biscuits, so at the supplier's place, they bake the biscuits and then they slice them. And when they slice them, they could introduce pathogens to the biscuit at that point. And the biscuits are used as a ready to eat product, so there's no customer kill stop. Um, so the EG Food Company can't control for pathogens in the biscuits because they're not heating them up at any point. Uh,
Right.
so the only thing they can do is have a supply chain control because they can't control it. So what they do is at receiving, they make sure their biscuits come from their approved supplier. And since we're looking at the ingredient and it is a supply chain control, we say yes, the control happens here. So that's one of the ones where it doesn't really make a lot of sense because it says, is it applied at this step?
Right.
But it's so whenever you have a supply chain control and you're looking at an ingredient, the answer is yes.
Okay.
Okay. And here's where you'll see some reiteration. So we look at the ingredients first and then we move on to the steps. And the steps include receiving. So we're looking at the oil again, right? Receiving pan release oil, and we're listing essentially the same thing, right? So it's a little bit redundant, um, but it helps us know what we need to check at receiving, right? Because if I receive something with an allergen in it, I need to know at receiving that it has that allergen because I'm required to like store those allergens separately and handle them in specific ways. So it's really important that, when I receive that product with an allergen in it, I know what to do with it. And the same thing will be true for your customers if they are, in fact, storing them separately from different allergens. I imagine that would change customer to customer for you.
Right, but the thing is that then it won't be my issue, right? I mean, the thing is, I
No,
give the paperwork that's with the ingredients on it,
you
but they want to do what they want to do with it. It's their choice.
you'll still have to have the allergen label, unfortunately. So
Yeah, I
they
mean,
just pop the
okay,
sticker on that says
right.
ingredient.
So how will I? I mean, the thing is, again, with the allergens being labeled or not,
Mm-hmm.
you know how I'm packing maybe 3 or 4 dozen bagels in one shot.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I could just let them know that ingredient list is available if you guys require it. I mean, am I liable? Am I like really responsible to be putting labels on every single bag?
Yes.
So I have to put labels on every single bag.
So yeah, you want the allergen statement on the bag so that when somebody receives it, they know what allergens are present in the product and then they can respond accordingly.
Okay, so every wholesale bag, so I would have to make those more stickers, I guess,
Yeah,
and
just
say
make a small sticker, something easy. Yeah.
something easy and say every, and just put it on each bag, I guess,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and say that it has wheat, milk, and sesame seed,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
But what about the ingredients? Do I have to label the ingredients as well or no?
Um, Not for wholesale.
Not for wholesale, right? Only for allergens.
Only for allergens.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. As far as I know, I can double check that. But as far as I know, yeah, only for the allergens.
Okay,
But we can look up specific labeling laws for wholesale. Okay. So if we look at their receiving step for their packaging, they have to check the packaging for the undeclared allergen statement. Or sorry, for their allergen statement. So the hazard is undeclared allergens, right? So it's a hazard if the egg, milk, soy, and wheat aren't on the label. So they do need a preventive control, and this is the control where they check the label when they receive it. And so because we're looking at receiving packaging, and the control happens here where we check the label when we receive it, then the answer for column 6 is yes, this preventive control happens at this step. We check the label for the allergen statement when we receive the packaging. So then we're moving deeper into the process, and they crack the eggs and they mix the ingredients. And their potential hazard here is metal because of that wire whip that we saw in table A17.
okay.
And so they decided they do need a preventive control, and it's their metal detector.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Yeah. Excuse me. And so we're looking at the mixing step. The metal detector step happens later. So we say no, the control isn't applied here.
okay,
Okay. So then the assemble wrap area is where they're taking the egg and they're adding the cheese, or they're adding the cheese and the biscuit, and then they wrap it up. So this is where their product is could potentially get contaminated by environmental pathogens. And so they have to have a sanitation control in place, like we discussed for your product as well. And then they also have potential allergen cross contact, which is not something you have to worry about, but they do. So they have their sanitation control number 1, which is cleaning the table, which is their food contact surface. So they have to clean and sanitize that. And then for the environmental pathogens, there's a little bit more to do. So you also have to clean the area surrounding that table, right? So the legs of the table, the floors, right? That's the general vicinity that's used in that area. And then the last sanitation control is hygienic zoning, which so this is a high risk area because the product is exposed to the environment, right, before it gets packaged after the kill step. And so we want to have special procedures being followed by employees, right? Like the special gowning, dedicated footwear. They probably follow specific procedures coming in and out of this area because it's a high risk area. So this is another time where column 6 tends to get confusing for people. Um, because this cleaning process, the sanitation process, is happening after production, right?
right.
And so it's not going to happen at the same time that we're assembling and wrapping things, but we don't ever list that sanitation procedure in the flow diagram.
Okay,
So if we're cleaning the equipment that's used at that step and it's a sanitation control, we say yes, it happens here.
okay.
Yeah. So I know to add to the confusing things. All right. And then we've got our last two couple of pieces. So the metal detector step, we listed metal as a potential hazard earlier. So this is where it's controlled. So we list metal again. We say yes, the control's applied here. Or we do need a preventive control. We list where the metal could come from. So the wire whip in the mixer, the biscuit, and the cheese. And then it is a process control. and that happens at the metal detector step. So yes, we're working on the metal detector step. That's where the control happens.
Okay, what about, so I could buy a metal detector as well for the store,
You could, yeah.
and then I could say that once a month, I mean, we rarely have any problem with the metals. So once a month, I do check it with the metal detector, and we don't find anything.
So the way most companies implement metal detector, they set it up in their production line, and all the product goes through the metal detector.
Oh, I see.
And so the metal detector will kick out any bagels that have metal in it.
Yeah, but the problem is how much, you know what, amount of sale that I do and amount of steps that are involved there.
Yeah.
It's not worth for me to do the wholesale anymore. You understand? If I gotta do everything by the book, like it's saying here,
Yeah.
then might be worth for me to just get rid of the wholesale altogether and go on the New York City Department of Health,
Yeah.
Department of Health, and not worry about agriculture department anymore. You know?
That's fair.
Yeah. So I
And
mean, the thing is, it just, but I'll see what the inspector says, and we'll
yeah.
take it from there, I guess. You
Yeah.
know?
You don't have to buy a metal detector. Like, that's not a requirement for you.
Right. I see.
So,
Okay.
yeah. You just have to do a visual inspection, that check for the metal, right? For the,
Okay.
yeah. There's definitely an understanding that small businesses can't do what larger businesses do. And so they know you're going to be like figuring out ways to make it work.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why the regulations are so vague, which makes them both annoying but also kind of useful. So, okay, so now we're going to go through an example hazard analysis using the peanut butter. We are going to work on one ingredient and two steps. And we're going to go through that chart. So let me pull up our peanut butter so we can choose which pieces we want to work on. So for the ingredients, you can choose anything. You could choose the peanuts, the sugar, the vegetable oil, the salts. You could even choose the packaging. Um, we could, I think there's sugar in here too, right? Yeah, there's sugar too. They just missed it in the list in the flow diagram. Any particular ingredient that you would like to work on or do the hazard analysis for in here?
We could do it for the sugar, I guess.
Cool. So we'll do sugar.
Or how about do it for cornmeal? Does it have to be this, or can I pick
We can do
corn?
for cornmeal. Just be aware that like when we review their answers, obviously it's not going to match like what we talked about.
Right, right.
Okay, so cornmeal, and then let's pick two steps from their flow diagram. Could be any two steps you want. They don't have to be in order. Could be just whatever's interesting to you. Like maybe the roasting because it's an oven similar in a similar-ish situation to yours, or
Uh,
maybe mixing.
Mixing, I guess.
Yeah,
Let's do the mixing.
mixing, and then so you want to do mixing, cornmeal, and then one more step.
And we could do the packaging, I guess.
Packaging. It's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so mixing, packaging, and we'll do cornmeal. Okay, so let me bring up our exercise book. Okay, so we're gonna put cornmeal, mixing, and packaging. So I'm gonna pull up the FDA hazard guide and we will see what we can find out about cornmeal. There's Appendix 1. When I search through the draft guidance for hazards, I usually use just Appendix 1 because it makes it a little bit easier to search through rather than the entire thing. Um, it's definitely useful to have all of the information of the full hazard guide, but for this specific purpose, it's just nice to use Appendix 1. When you're navigating it, usually I just do Command F to search for my specific thing that I'm looking for. It doesn't always work because they don't always list the exact thing in the table. It might be listed as like the category, right? So we looked at like the different types of categories in the example, right? So these are our different categories. So if I was looking for cornmeal, it might be listed in bakery items. Here we go. It's probably in this one.
Same.
The grains,
Yeah.
pulses,
Yeah.
flours,
It's
starches.
50 and 1J, right?
Yeah. And so you can click on 1J and it'll link directly to it, which is
Okay.
convenient. Or you can hit Command F and do a search and see if cornmeal is directly referenced in it, right? And then it shows me where cornmeal is, which is really
Okay.
nice. So we make sure we get the right category and the right subcategories. So we've got a milled product, it's corn, and it's stored at ambient temperature, so we're good there.
Right.
And it tells us Bacillus cereus is a potential hazard,
Right.
and Salmonella.
Terminal. Okay.
Um, and we would probably do a little research on Bacillus cereus, because I believe it can produce a toxin in the food. So we'll just take a little deeper dive into it. Um, and then, of course, we're listing both of them in the hazard analysis table. So keep those in mind. Let's see if we can find chemical hazards for cornmeal. So not for the exact match. Let's go back to the beginning for the chemical hazard table and see. J and rice, other milled products, root flours. It's not a root. It's not.
What is number one? No. Wheat, rye. It says corn there. Corn, Amarnath,
Grains, non-rice.
millet.
Yes. That's the one.
Yeah. So
So
it's
mycotoxins and pesticides.
right.
And let's see our little note. So we've got a footnote. Applicable toxins. Aflatoxin is the one we're going to be concerned about, and fuminisms. You see those two listed here. And then if you are doing this for your flour, this is the one it lists for your flour. Right. And also this one it says for wheat, if you use wheat flour.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to put our mycotoxins and the pesticides into the table as well. So we had Bacillus cereus and Salmonella. And then...
For the chemical, we're going to list the other ones, okay?
Okay. And the only thing about, choosing cornmeal is that we don't know anything about the supplier.
Right.
But I'm still going to look at table A17 with you, and we can think about how cornmeal is made and see if we can't come up with something. So, this guy. Okay. So I imagine for cornmeal, they probably get in dried corn, and then maybe they probably do go through like a sieve process where they remove foreign material, and then they would mill it, so they have some kind of grinder for milling it. Um, would they process it? So it's being used in a baked good, so they probably don't process it for pathogens. So if I was looking at this sheet, right, if they don't ever process it for pathogens, we don't have a lethal treatment. Um, it's not time or temperature controlled because it's not refrigerated or frozen for safety. They're not formulating for safety. It's not in reduced oxygen packaging. They're not adding ingredients. We're just grinding. Not in a hermetically sealed container. It can't be recontaminated because we never process it to kill the pathogens in the first place. In production, there's no allergens, right? It's just cornmeal. If we knew what this facility was like, right? Do they mill other things? We would know whether or not allergen cross contact was a potential. Um, but if we assume it's just non allergens, we could say no.
Okay, but the thing is, for the cornmeal now, cornmeal is coming to me already made.
Yeah.
So why do I have to do this?
You have to do it for every single ingredient, for every supplier that you have.
So that I would have to do this, the bio and chemical and physical. So I would have to do this for every single ingredient,
Uh-huh.
and then where would I get the information? Like with the reagents, like what needs to be done to the reagents? I don't know what's being done to the reagents.
Right, so you would have to ask your supplier for that information, right? So, um, can you give me a description of your process? Or maybe, maybe you set something up where you send them this and be like, hey, can you help me understand if any of this is an issue? Um, yeah, you would need them to communicate with you to be able to evaluate if there any of these are potential hazards. The only other way is to go audit them or to read an audit report. So, yeah, this is a new requirement as of last year. That everyone who is doing this, they have to go through this list for their supplier, all their suppliers.
Oh.
Yeah. So,
What if these people are not, I send them an email, I don't hear nothing back from them, then
then
what do I do?
hope find suppliers that will email you, right? Because
Okay,
you're gonna have communication back and forth to make this work.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, there. What are you gonna do?
And I know it's a pain. And a
Yes.
lot of suppliers are not great at communication. But I would imagine, if your inspector comes and sees that you're making like your best efforts that you can, they're gonna take that into consideration.
Okay.
So if I was thinking about this company, I think metal is really your most likely hazard from corn milling.
Okay, I see. But also, can I look this up online or no?
This particular form?
No, I mean not this particular. Like, what are the chemical hazards with cornmeal?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we looked up the chemical hazards with cornmeal in the guidance, right? And then
Right.
you could also Google search. So let me switch my
Uh,
screen.
right. So if I Google search, that would provide me some information. Yes.
Yeah. So I could say, what are some common food safety hazards associated with cornmeal production? Let me share that. There we go. And then let's see if the AI is right. Salmonella, E. coli. So we know E. coli is not one because in the FDA guidance it said Salmonella and um, Bacillus cereus. It did get aflatoxins and fuminisms and pesticide residues, right?
Right.
And physical stones, glass, metal. That's you know, pretty likely that we would see metal. Maybe we have some leftover stuff, but I bet the sieves for the suppliers are generally pretty good. Would depend on the supplier. Um, but yeah, you can see the sources: Ardent Mills, World Health Organization, PubMed. Like those are things that we can generally trust, right?
Right.
And I would absolutely click on it
Okay.
to find it to make sure, because it may give you a good source, but it may conflate things. Like I've clicked on the link and it's showing me hazards that are for like a completely different product.
I see.
So
Okay.
always check on them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like this one, this is listing just all the general hazards. So yeah. And then as you're searching through, we have the FDA here for food defect action levels. So we know, insects are a pretty likely thing to happen in our cornmeal. And this is telling us, like, what's the allowable amount, right? Um, so, yeah. Ardent Mills. Ardent Mills is closely associated with the people who run the HACCP program, so they might have some really good information. Wow. And then this is the regulation that your cornmeal people would have to follow. This is the international regulation for, it's called Codex. So you can reference international regulation if you find it. So hopefully that wasn't like too much. Yeah. So we're gonna say metal. We could list the bugs and pesticides if we wanted to. Okay. I forgot to put pesticides. And then I'm just gonna put mixing here and packaging here. Just needed a little bit more room. Okay. So then our job is to look at Bacillus cereus and Salmonella and decide, do these hazards need a preventive control? And in the case of Bacillus cereus and Salmonella, we know that they can cause some pretty serious issues for somebody, can cause serious illness. And we know they're inherent to cornmeal. If they're not controlled, it's going to be a problem. So in this case, we're going to say we need a preventive control. My justification. So when I do my justification, I usually list like where I found the information. Like I will say the FDA hazard guide lists these as inherent hazard. Jeez, inherent hazards to cornmeal. They could cause serious illness if not controlled. I'm also going to talk about what my supplier does, and I'm going to say supplier does not process corn meal to control for these pathogens. Right, so that's my justification that I'm gonna need some kind of kill step for sure,
Right.
or somewhere
Okay.
upstream. And so, in the case of your product, the process preventive control is the cook step or baking, right? Whatever you want to call it.
Right. Okay.
Baking. And then we're looking at the ingredient. Baking would happen later. Sorry, what did I just do? There we go. Baking would happen later. So we would say no, the control isn't applied here.
Right. Control would be applied when we're gonna bake.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. So then we look at our mycotoxins, aflatoxin and fuminisms. And I can get rid of these notes that came from the guidance telling us what products the toxin was associated with. I just copied and pasted. So for our mold toxins, again, we have to evaluate, do we need a preventive control for that? And I've seen this handled 2 different ways. So one way I've seen is, you say yes, we know it's likely to happen. Depending, mold can be introduced from like improper growing conditions, improper harvesting, improper storage. There's like a lot of opportunity for these mold toxins to happen. Um, so I could say, yes, we know it's likely to occur. We're going to use a supply chain control to manage it. The other way I've seen it handled, which is rarer, is that they say, no, we've got a control measure, right? So rather than a preventive control, we have a control measure to handle this where we do testing, right, of the incoming ingredients. So this is so in a lot of situations for the hazard analysis, like there's not one right answer. There's like a better answer than others, and it depends on the situation that you're in.
I understand, but for this one,
Mm-hmm.
for the chemical hazards, so do any of the food safety hazards require preventive control? What can I do about these?
So we could say yes, and we could say um, this is actually really similar here. So we know that these are inherent hazards listed by the FDA.
Right. Okay.
And then we would say supplier must properly manage.
Manage these, and then I would have to get the certificate from the supplier
Yeah.
for the mic, right?
Yes, exactly. So we would say use approved supplier, and then we would get a certificate of analysis.
Right.
Yeah. If say you talk to your supplier and they have data that shows like they haven't had mycotoxin issues over the last few years, you could use that as justification to say, no, I don't need a preventive control.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why I talk about it being not like cut and dry.
But then it's going to fall into the inspector whether what he feels is important or not.
To some extent, yeah, it'll be the inspector and their opinion, and then what justification and documentation that you have that shows, like the choices that you make, and whether or not there's justification that they are,
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, so because we're looking at the ingredient and it's a supply chain control, we're gonna say yes, the control is applied at this step.
Right. Okay.
Then for pesticides, So, like your inspector said, we can say, no, we don't need a preventive control. Product is sourced from inside the United States, and um, pesticide compliance is generally good. So, not likely to occur.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this form that you are using, I could download it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I saw it online that on the FDA website they had that.
Yes.
It's just that it was too overwhelming for me to get started on that.
Mm-hmm.
But now I kind of have some idea, and then I'll go, I guess, step by step and see how
Yeah.
far I'm going to get with this.
Absolutely. And I'll also provide you with links to course materials, and the course materials have this too. It's in one of the appendices in that
Right,
big book. Yeah.
right. I saw it. I mean, it's in the big book, but
Yeah. Do you want the
the FDA
PDF?
website, yeah, I could use that. I guess start typing it up. I guess to
And
look more.
they have a food safety plan builder too.
Okay, cool.
And I can show you the other way to write this for, say, a product that comes from a different country, if you would
Uh-huh.
like. So, say we're worried about pesticides and the product comes from outside of the United States. I would say compliance with U.S. pesticide regulations varies. And so essentially that what I'm saying is because the product's coming from outside of the US, then we don't know if they're using the right pesticides. We don't know if they're using it like according to their directions, right? Because different countries have different pesticides that are allowed. Um, so in which case I would be using that supply chain control, which would be, use approved supplier and that certificate of analysis. Um, Another thing to consider if you're using suppliers from outside of the United States, there is a foreign supplier verification program that has to be done. So, say your distributor is sending you that ingredient from India. Um, you might ask them, like, do you have a foreign supplier verification program? Can I see your documentation with that?
Okay.
So, say foreign supplier verification program. Just so, it's on your radar. I'll send
Sure.
you this too. And since it's supply chain control, that's a yes. So that's how you would do it with a yes.
Okay.
Okay, so let's do metal. So assuming their grinder, they've got metal and metal contact, the question would be, do we think the core meal supplier has a metal detector? Probably.
I think so. Yes.
So, so we could say something like supplier has a metal detector, metal findings are highly unlikely and rarely occur. So we could say something to that measure. Um, we could say, supply management is done through a GMP program. That way, there's some implication that you are aware that your supplier has potential metal, and that you maybe sent them, something that said, "Do you have a metal detector? Can you show us data?" Maybe you have a history with them, and you're like, "Hey, we haven't seen metal in this product for the last 3 years," something like that to back up justification.
Okay.
just as an example. Okay. Bugs. So in the case of bug contamination, let's see. So we would look up the defect action level. We would evaluate whether or not our supplier is likely to get above the defect action level, right? Um, so again, this would be based on your supplier's performance, right? So with your supplier, you know if we hold it for too long, we could have bugs. So we have to be careful about like how long we hold it, but that's probably going to be managed with a prerequisite program or a GMP, depending on what you name it. So I might say supplier is compliant with defect action levels for bugs. We implement a GMP around product use, i.e. first in, first out,
Okay.
throw away expired product.
Got it.
Right. So you can see how like what your facility does affects it and how what their facility does affects it, and that's why we have to think about both. So with that said, we're going to think about peanut butter now, and we're going to think
Okay.
about the mixing step.
Right.
So I'm going to pull up their food safety plan again, and we're going to look at the mixing step. Here we go. So for the mixing step, that peanut paste goes to their high shear mixer. They add sugar, salt, and oil, and it's mixed until everything's dispersed evenly. And then they do say metal on metal contact may occur during mixing. So we've got potential for metal. And then also, if we look at our flow diagram, the product's exposed to the environment at this point during the mixing step.
Right.
And we've already gone through our kill step. So we do have to worry about environmental pathogens too. So to fully think about what hazards could affect the product to the mixing step, I'm going to use that same table we used for the cornmeal manufacturer. Now I officially have too many windows open. Here we go. Okay. So we're thinking about the mixing step. And we had the metal on metal contact, so we're going to mark yes for metal. And we're exposed to the environment after the kill step, so that one's a yes. And then we have to decide, are any other of these a potential hazard at the mixing step? So the first one applies at the roasting step, not at mixing. The second one doesn't apply to the peanut butter at all because we're not temperature controlled for safety. There's no formulation control. We're not in reduced oxygen packaging. We are adding ingredients at the mixing step.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're adding is sugar, salt, and vegetable oil, none of which are likely to introduce pathogens. So I would probably consider this one a no, just like in the EG Food Company example for the cheese. Because, yeah, if you look up sugar and salt in the guidance, there's no biological hazards. Same for oil. Lack of container integrity. It's not in a hermetically sealed container at this point. We're labeling later, so that would happen at the packaging step. Allergen cross contact is not an issue here. The only allergen cross contact happens at their filler. Misformulation. Nope, they're not adding any ingredients with a maximum use level here. They wouldn't be able to produce acrylamide here. Glass, hard plastic. Okay, so it's just the metal and the environmental pathogens. So I'm going to copy this. And then metal. So we're going to go through the same thought process as we did for the cornmeal. So we would say for our environmental pathogens, do any of these, does it require a preventive control? And in this case, so I would say yes here. And I will say product is exposed to the environment after the kill step and before packaging. And the product is ready to eat and could support pathogen presence. Now, the wording is important. Presence. So, if I have salmonella in there, it is a problem. It's not likely to grow, but it is a problem if it's in there. Because if I have too much, it's still going to make somebody sick, even if it doesn't grow. So in this case, this is a sanitation preventive control. And it's going to look like the example for UG Food Company, where we have sanitation of food contact surfaces, environmental sanitation.
What do you mean by environmental sanitation?
So they have a specific area where the mixing happens, right?
Right.
And so I need to clean the mixer, but I also need to clean the area around the mixer. That's what I mean by environmental sanitation. So like the floors, the walls, the ceilings, the legs of the mixer, or whatever it is, the tables in the area.
And in my case, how would environmental sanitation come into play? Like, okay, fine, we clean the mixer, we clean the table that we use. So, environmental sanitation would be like once a month that we clean the walls.
So I think, let me show you an example. Maybe that'll be a little bit more clear. Let's go back to peanut butter. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to skip to their sanitation control. There we go. Products area. So this is food contact surfaces. There we go. Environmental sanitation. So their non-food contact surfaces is how they word it. And it's grinder, mixer, and filler areas. And it says cleaning and sanitizing of the floor and equipment support structures, so they don't include their walls, in the exposed product area. And it talks about, like, because there are multiple areas in this production where you could have contamination. So it's the grinding, the mixing, and the fill waste seal. So it's the equipment in that area, right? The floor and the equipment in that area. So trying to minimize recontamination with environmental pathogens and prevent the establishment. And what that means is, like, we're trying to prevent, like, salmonella from being there and then growing over time. So they do it daily after production, right? So you clean the food contact surfaces and you clean the tables and the areas around it and the floors. That's done by their sanitation team member. They talk about how they're doing it. Um, they talk about separate tools for the floors and equipment support structure because the floors might have higher contamination rates than the other surfaces. They use a squeegee and they follow their dry cleaning procedures because they're doing dry cleaning. They're using a hydrogen peroxide based sanitizer. They follow the directions on the sanitizer. And they monitor this. So they inspect the equipment, support structure, the floor, and the area for residual soil and cleanliness after cleaning and before sanitizing, and they record it on their daily sanitation log. And they also use a test strip to measure sanitizer concentration before they apply the sanitizer, and they record that on the daily sanitation log. If they see residual soil, they re-clean, re-sanitize. If the sanitizer is not at the right concentration, they use a new solution. To verify, they have a supervisor that reviews and signs a daily sanitation log. And they also do environmental monitoring, which means they have somebody swabbing and looking for environmental pathogens.
That could be done like by, like maybe Ecolab, the company Ecolab,
Yeah.
they do that kind of thing.
Yeah, they might do that kind of thing. I don't.
Okay, where they come into my store and might take samples and see
Mm-hmm.
if it's okay or not.
Yeah.
And how, as a small manufacturer, do I have to bother with it or no?
So the minimum requirement for verifying of a sanitation control is that your surfaces are visually clean. That is the minimum requirement. So you
Okay.
don't necessarily have to have an environmental monitoring program, but it is a good idea if your product is exposed to the environment and it's ready to eat. So you're there's a good chance you'll get some push in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Cool. And then the last one, so the last one's hygienic zoning. That's just identifying which areas are the high risk areas in your facility and making sure your employees are following proper personnel practices in those areas, and dictating any special procedures around it. Like, do I expect them to degown and wash their hands and regown? Are there particular colored smocks that they have to follow? Do they have to wear special shoes? Do they go through a sanitizer foot bath? Like those things, which are usually GMPs, but in a high risk area like this, they become a sanitation preventive control.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. And since we are cleaning this area, we say yes, the controls applied here. For metal, we know that the mixer has metal on metal contact, so we're going to say yes, we need a preventive control. Metal on metal contact can occur during mixing. And this is a point where if we had like the history of the company, we would say, we know this is likely to happen or whatever. And so the control we would use, since they have a metal detector, we're going to say it's the metal detector. In your case, it's going to be that visual observation.
Yeah.
All right. And this is controlled at the metal detector step. We're looking at the mixing step. So for column 6, we say no, it's not applied here. Okay. All right, so we've got one more step to work on, which is the packaging step. which is a potentially pretty juicy step. If we look at the food safety plan, go back up to the description. Here we go. Do you want to do the step where they fill it and then cap it, or do you want to do the step where they label it?
We could do label and code, I guess.
Okay. So for the label coating step, the product's sealed in its jar now, so we don't have to worry about environmental pathogens.
Okay, can you hold on for 1 minute? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
just gotta refer to one thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so we're putting the label on. The product is already sealed in its package. So really what we're concerned about here is, did we get the right label on the package, right? And specifically, do we have the correct allergen statement on that label? So we are going to look at table A17 again. And when you apply the table A17, you can just do it for your full process. I would recommend making notes. So if you're doing it for your entire process, be like, okay, which step does this hazard apply at? Does it apply at multiple steps? Let's make sure we list all of them. Because it's just...
So in a way, I gotta do this biological, chemical hazard, physical hazard for every single step that I'm gonna write down in the flow diagram.
Yes, yeah. So what you're gonna do, the way it's applied most of the time or used most of the time, is you'll think about it for your whole process, right? And that
Right.
does include every single step. And so if I were going through this, say for your process, if I thought there was potential for pathogens surviving the baking step, I would say this one has potential at baking. If I know there's not like a time temperature control issue for your storage for your um, product, so that's a no for the bagels, right? You're not formulated for safety, so that's a no. You're not in reduced oxygen packaging. You're not adding ingredients after. Container integrity is a no for you. Recontamination, so this one's a possibility, and so it would be during the packing step, right? Like, because it comes out of the oven and then it goes into the package. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I would just put little yeses where I think it's a yes, and list the steps so that when you work on that step in the hazard analysis, you know which one applies there.
Okay.
That's how I would do it. This is a recommendation, not a requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, and then label would be the labeling step and at receiving. Allergen cross contact's not an issue for you. Yellow number 5 could happen, probably at your mixing step. And then metal, you said yes, and there were multiple steps, so you would list all the steps for the metal.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what I would do. And then when I go to do my hazard analysis, once I get to each of the steps that I mentioned, right, in my
Mm-hmm.
little notes, then I would put in the hazard.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So for a peanut butter company though, we're just thinking about the labeling steps. So it would be this guy, undeclared allergens. And really nothing else. Let's put labeling. Okay, and then do we need that preventive control? So because we have this allergen in our product, it's gonna be a yes. We're gonna say, peanuts, um, and milk are two of the major allergens covered in the Food Allergen Labeling Consumer Protection Act and are required to be present on the label. The danger there, if it's not on the label, the consumer might not realize, then they might die. So because it's about allergens, it's an allergen preventive control. So when you're thinking about the type, you want to think about like what's being done here, right? I'm checking a label for allergens, so it's an allergen control. For the metal detector, it's one of my processing steps, so it's a process control. For this one, I'm cleaning and sanitizing to control, so it's a sanitation control. Um, and if I'm relying on my supplier, it's a supply chain control. So that sometimes can be a little bit confusing when people are first starting out. So there's a tendency to want to call everything a process control. So
Right.
yeah, just wanted to put that out there.
No, I mean that's what I'm like. I was getting overwhelmed with process control, preventative control, allergen control.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. It's like how to go. I mean, where to start and where to finish. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, the thing is now every step needs to have this biohazard. I need to think about every step, what could cause the biohazard, mean or chemical hazard
Mhm.
in every step, I guess, and
Yep.
then we take it from there, I guess.
Mhm. That's exactly it. You've got it.
Okay.
So for this particular one, right, the control we're using is labeling. It's applied at this step, right? So we say yes, it happens here. So is it starting to make a little more sense? It sounds like it's starting to make a little more sense.
Yes, yes, it makes a little bit more sense now, but it's just that doing all this, just to sit down and start filling out the information, it's easier. I'm telling you, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but for me to do it by myself, I'll be sitting in front of the computer. You know how you go totally blank?
Yep.
It's like, okay, you read a chapter one time. So when I was in college, you read a chapter first time, you're like, oh, I think I got it. Maybe I gotta read it again.
Yep.
Second time you read it, oh, you know what, start making sense. The third time you're like, okay, fine, I got it now. I know what
Yep.
to do. I'm in that kind of position now where, I read the first thing. Now I'm talking to you. Now things are becoming a little bit more clear.
Mhm.
Now, believe it or not, I'm going to need to do the third time.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, okay, fine, I got it. So
Absolutely.
now try to do it on my own.
Mhm.
And all the questions I have, I'm going to need help with.
Yeah. Yeah, you can always email me if you have questions.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll make the plan and I'll send you a copy of my plan. And then maybe if you have time, you can take a look at it.
Sure. I can take a peek at it.
Right.
Okay. So, with that done, How are you doing mentally? Do you want a quick break before we keep going, or you want?
Yeah, let's take a 5 minute break.
Yeah.
Okay, and then let me get a cup of coffee, I guess.
Yeah.
That's gonna help me. Just give me 5, 10 minutes, and then we can go from there.
Let's do 10. Let's. We got
10.
we got time.
All right.
Yeah.
All right then. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, so now that we've been through the hazard analysis, arguably the hardest part, we're going to go through the preventive controls and what goes into each of them and how that essentially affects the choices that you're making to manage them each day. So, for our preventive controls, for each one, we have to decide a critical limit. It's essentially the criteria that means what's safe versus unsafe. Right? So, for your bagels, we can look up how hot do I have to cook this bagel for how long to kill off E. coli?
Right.
And then we would use that as the critical limit.
Right.
Okay, great. So then from there, your critical limit doesn't just have to be numbers. Like it could be something that's not a number, which is why they include the term parameters and values. So say, somebody has like a screen as one of their preventive controls to filter out physical contaminants, foreign contaminants, then the fact that the screen is in place and intact might be their critical limit. So once we've got the critical limit in place, we also likely have operating limits, right? Because you have a cook temperature you have to get to for like quality and texture and all those things.
Right.
So that would be your operating limit. If you don't hit your operating limit, it doesn't mean that your product's unsafe, right? So it gives you a good bit of wiggle room to make sure you don't hit that critical limit. And with your process, you're highly unlikely to violate that critical limit. So what we do is we take the hazard analysis form, we copy the step for the control, and we copy the hazard from one to the other. And we're going to fill out our process preventive control form. So to that end, we list the critical limit, how we're going to monitor this particular step, right? So taking that temperature, how often is that happening? Who are we going to assign to that task? And for who, it's like a job title or trained employee or designee, something like that. And then corrective action, what do we do if we don't meet our critical limit? We didn't cook it for hot enough, for long enough, whatever the case may be. And then how do we verify that we're cooking it the way we said we would and that it's controlling those pathogens? And then what records will we need to prove that we are doing all these things? Okay. So when you're looking up critical limits, it's just like when you're looking up the hazards. We want good, scientifically backed sources. So a lot of times you can find this in the guidance. You might have to go to other resources. So for the cook step for EG Food Company, they set their critical limit as a temperature of greater than or equal to 158 Fahrenheit instantaneously. This comes from the FDA Food Code that says if I'm cooking eggs for future service, then I need to get to 158 for less than a second to be safe.
Okay.
Okay, so from there, we figure out how we're going to monitor this omelet temperature. And then also the corrective actions. So monitoring, you're just figuring out, how do we track this process to make sure it's controlling the hazard? Now, one of the more useful pieces about monitoring is that you identify when you have deviations. I didn't hit my critical limit, I might have unsafe product. Very important. Um, it also gives me proof to my regulator, so when my inspector comes, they can see I've been following this process, I've been tracking this, I know I've been making safe product. And then, of course, you can use that information over time to identify if you have any trends developing. So for the omelet, what we're monitoring is our critical limit. And often, I mean, not always, but often you can copy the critical limit to the what. It works in many cases, but not all cases. So what they're monitoring is that the omelet surface temperature is greater than or equal to 158. How? They're using an infrared surface thermometer. Okay, so they reference the equipment they're using. Then frequency, they said each cook station checks with a minimum frequency of every 10th omelet. When you write your frequency, you want to write it thinking about giving yourself enough wiggle room for real life. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner in terms of compliancy. Like if I say I check once an hour on the hour, if I am a minute late, technically I'm non-compliant. I might still be safe, but technically I'm non-compliant because that's what I wrote. So I might say once an hour within 15 minutes or something like that. I talked a lot about frequency being based on how much product you can afford to lose. There's also, how much does that process vary for you?
But the thing is, listen, these people they come up with these all kind of guidelines and this and that, but I mean, somebody can be, making this stuff up. I mean, I know the process is there, like who's going to be checking every 10 minutes, unless you have the machines doing it automatically.
Right, that's why
So,
you get to choose how often you write, right? Like that's
right.
yeah.
But it's going to depend on what kind of product or not.
Yeah, it'll depend on the risk associated with the product, right?
Okay.
Yeah. It'll depend on the risk associated with the process, how much your process varies, right? All those things I was talking about a minute ago.
Right,
Those are
right,
gonna
right. Okay,
affect.
so with the corrective action, I understand, but with the verification, it's like, now I have somebody who's making the bagels. He's going to be checking the temperature, every hourly, let's say. And then, I mean, the corrective action is, it's like if the bagel temperature oven doesn't go down from 500 degrees, then there is no need for any corrective action.
Right. Okay. So let me be clear about a couple things. For one, um, your corrective action is around your critical limit, right?
Right.
So we have to. It's not the 500 degrees. That's an operating limit. That is not a critical limit.
Okay.
Your critical limit is going to be whatever you research and find. This is how hot you need to cook the bagel to for how long to kill the E. coli in the bagel. Okay.
Right.
And then you would do your validation study on your equipment to see what temperature does the oven need to be to achieve that, and how long
Okay.
does the bagel need to be in the oven to achieve that.
Okay.
That's your validation. Uh, and so your corrective action will be written as if you don't hit that critical limit, whatever it ends up being, it'll be below the 500. Then, and you include the time too. Then we put the product on hold. These are the pieces that are required in the corrective action. Actually, let me get to the corrective action slide and I will list it for you then because it'll be in front of your face at the same time that I'm talking about it.
Okay.
But let's finish off. So the frequency they chose here is probably too much. Like an operator will mess this up, which is the point I
Okay.
was making earlier.
Okay.
So then for who, they wrote cook operator or designee. So that's a job title. And you can include or trained employee or designee. And that gives you more wiggle room. Okay?
Okay.
So corrective action, you are required to put into place things that will figure out what caused the problem. So they say find the root cause and then take actions to prevent recurrence. Okay? So keep it from happening again. So in the case of the oven, if the oven didn't hit the right temperature, what caused it? How do we keep it from happening again? Then the other piece is to figure out what's going on with the product. So you're supposed to find all affected product. And the term that they usually use for that is go back to the last good check. So the last time I checked my oven temperature and we were good. How, you know, what was the last time I checked? And all the product between the check that happened now, where it was not hot enough, and the last check where it was hot enough, that's all my potentially affected product. So that's why we talk about how much product can you potentially afford to lose.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, so we go back to the last good check, we look at that product and we evaluate it. Can we rework it? In other words, can we like still cook it, sell it? Is it okay to pass through? Did it get hot enough still that it's okay? Like, is it safe? Or is it something we throw away? Okay, so those are the major pieces of your corrective action.
Okay.
Okay, then the other piece that's included in this section are corrections. So in a corrective action, I might have unsafe food, right? If I didn't cook the bagel long enough, I might have an unsafe bagel. Correction is I had a deviation from my critical limit, but I don't have any unsafe food or potentially unsafe food. So here's the example. Say I have a sanitation preventive control for my food contact surface, right? Maybe the table where I'm, throwing out dough. And I am about to start making product, but I look at the table and I realize it's dirty. I'm going to clean and sanitize before I make that product, right? But if my critical limit was visually clean, which is probably what you're going to choose, then I technically had a deviation, right? Because my critical limit's visually clean. So I would re-clean and re-sanitize before I make product. I don't have any affected product, that is a correction. What that means is I don't have to put together a corrective action report where I find out what caused the issue, I keep it from happening again. I don't have to evaluate affected food because there isn't any affected food. So it's a much easier, like, fast in the moment fix.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So corrective actions have to be done if we have a deviation from the critical limit, i.e., we don't hit that critical limit, we don't get hot enough or long enough in the case of baking. If we didn't do the monitoring activity, so say, I'm supposed to do it once every 2 hours and I forget, then I didn't do it properly, so we have to do a corrective action. Or if I realize that an unsafe product might have been produced, so maybe product was made yesterday and you're reviewing the records from yesterday and you realize that somebody made a mistake and we might have unsafe product. Like maybe they forgot to do the check for the metal pieces, right? Then you would have to do a corrective action. So when you're writing your corrective action procedures, you could literally just write what's on this slide. So that could be really helpful to you in trying to get this out fast. Once, you're fully in the thick of it and in your understanding and you're fleshing out your food safety plan, if you want to add details to this, it's a great idea because it will help whoever's doing the corrective action to have better guidance. right? Because we want the employees to understand what to do. Because
Okay.
this is going to become a procedure that somebody's going to follow, right? The monitoring is going to become a procedure that somebody has to follow. The corrective action has become a procedure that somebody's going to have to follow. So in the case of EG Food Company, if they don't hit the temperature, they keep cooking, and then they discard all the product back to the last good check. See that term again. If they didn't do the temperature check, they discard all the product back to the last good check. In both cases, they determine the root cause. So why did we not get to the right temperature? And then it says retrain or correct as appropriate. So retraining, employee mistake, correct is very important. It's always important to dive deeper into more than it was just an employee mistake, because a lot of issues are more foundational than that. Like, why did the employee make the mistake? Did we have an issue with the training program? Is there something that makes it difficult for them to do this thing, and so they've chosen to make this other choice, right? So doing a deeper dive will help you correct issues more consistently and in a more permanent fashion, or at least a more effective way. So from there, we're going to move on to the verification part, which is very normal for people to be confused about this section. Um, so essentially, validation. Validation is the scientific evidence we're using to support the plan. Right? So that's where we talk about doing validation as like a test on your equipment to see that it can reach the parameters it needs to control the hazard, or to determine the critical limits based on your equipment. It could also include the FDA guidance, any research that you did, any documents, scientific studies that you found. That would be a part of your validation.
Okay.
And then verification is going to be what you're doing on the day to day, all right, at work. So it's going to be things like reviewing paperwork. It's going to be the calibration. It's and calibration specifically of instruments used during monitoring. So the thermometer that I'm using in the oven is what I'm calibrating. That's my verification, right? Um, so there are lots of different types or things that we can do for verification, and we're going to look at a few examples of that. And of course, you have to keep records of each of these things for your preventive controls. That's why we say as few preventive controls as possible, because it's a lot of work, as you know.
Right.
Those are the definitions of verification and validation.
Okay, so one more question for you. Let's say, I understand your point about allergen control now.
Mm-hmm.
If I tell the inspector, oh, you know what, we're using sesame oil for the plain bagel as well. Mean, is this guy gonna give me any hard time as to what I'm gonna do? That's how we make our bagels.
It's a fairly normal thing for people to do. So I don't know about your inspector personally and what their
Right.
feelings are
I
around
mean,
it.
yeah. So it shouldn't be a big deal,
It
right? I mean, I
shouldn't
choose to
be.
report sesame oil, so you really can tell me that I can.
Yeah,
Me, and as long as I'm labeling it, I got signs outside, then I should be fine, right?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. As long as you have that allergen warning, you're set.
All right. Cool.
Okay, so another way to verify, like say you have a sanitation preventive control, which you might end up having, if you're checking the concentration of a sanitizer, like that would be
Right.
verification. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, and you don't have a metal detector, but a lot of companies, if they have a metal detector, they will uh, do accuracy checks where they run some like standards through to make sure it rejects the product with the metal in it. Depending on their system, maybe once an hour or once every 2 hours, something like that. And then they would do an annual calibration. So for you, verification for metal, for controlling a metal, would probably more look like record review. Did they do the check? And then maybe like an extra visual inspection.
Right. Okay.
It could also be watching somebody do a process, right? Like, I watched the person doing the baking. Did they do it right?
Right. Okay.
Mhm. And I talked a lot about validation with heating processes. It's also applicable in cooling processes. Like, say we have a freezing process, showing that we can freeze it fast enough to keep so that we don't have microbial growth.
Right.
So for regulatory requirement, we only have to validate process controls. So we don't have to validate any of the other type of preventive controls. So I don't have to validate allergen, sanitation, or supply chain controls. Some companies will choose to validate sanitation preventive controls because it can be cost saving for them in the long run. Like if I have an allergen clean and I validate it by there are allergen test kits that you can get. Those allergen test kits can be for specific allergens, so you could do the clean with your process, do the test, and show that your sanitation is effective enough to remove that allergen. Then you could do that to justify like doing a swab of a surface less often if you're swabbing to show that you cleaned something, which a lot of companies move to. So, like, as you're growing and growing and growing, like, the bigger you get, you might eventually start doing swabbing.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. And there are different kinds of swabs, which we can talk about in the sanitation section. So, we're required to do validation within 90 days of starting production or 90 days of making a change to a process preventive control. The best practice is to do your validation before you implement your plan, but that's not required. Now, when it comes to procedures, written procedures for verification, so I have to have a standard operating procedure on how to calibrate my thermometer, for example.
Right.
So, how do I calibrate any of my other monitoring and verification instrumentation? Maybe it's a pH meter or something. We have to have written procedures for product testing, and if you have an environmental monitoring program, then you would have procedures for that. You don't have to have a written procedure that says how you do record review. That's not required.
Okay.
So for test procedures, um, you want to make sure that the lab is giving you the adequate information you need. So our test procedures, they have to be scientifically valid. That means I have to like figure out what the appropriate test is, which the lab will probably know when you send it to them. And then I have to be able to interpret that data. And I have to make sure I identify what we're analyzing, right? Is it which chemical hazard is it, or which microorganism is it? Um, what lot did I take samples of, and how many samples did I take? And then what lab did it go to, and if we get a result that's outside of our critical limit, what would the corrective action procedures be?
Okay.
So you could send a bagel off for testing for E. coli contamination, for example, or salmonella.
Right.
So then, of course, our record review. We talked earlier about how you review those records within a week. That's specifically the monitoring record and corrective action records. The verification records, like the testing and the all of that, the requirement is that you review it in a reasonable time frame, and you get to decide what that is. I think most companies, they just set the same window for all of it because it makes it simpler in their system to manage.
Okay.
But again, it's up to you how you set it up.
Okay.
Okay, so We talked earlier about the review. You just look over the document, you sign, you date. That document review, you can record it on the same form, or you can have a separate form where you document all of your record review. It's up to you how you choose to set that up. The parts that go in your food safety plan would be the hazard analysis and the introductory section. You choose to include that. And then each of your preventive controls. And then the procedures around managing those preventive controls. And then your recall plan.
The recall plan is basically me writing down the name and numbers of people who are picking up the bagels from me. So God forbid there's a problem with the bagels, so I could notify them and they could get the bagels back, I guess.
That's part of it.
Yes.
There's actually kind of a lot involved. So you're supposed to have defined job roles for the people that are going to be on your recall team. So who's helping you implement the recall. And then you'll have contact information for them. Preferably, I know your company's small, but ideally backup people for them if they're out, like if they're not present. You would need the contact for the FDA because you're required to notify your FDA recall coordinator. And then you have to have basically set up statements. What are we going to say? How do we communicate, right? Whether it's email, phone, press release, what are we going to communicate? How is that going to happen? Who's allowed to say what? And then as you go through and you're getting product back, you have to track that. So you have to track, who did I call? Where did I locate the product? Did I get it back yet? How much did I get back until you're finished? So it's kind of a lot. There's a mock, like an example recall plan in the materials too. It's also
Yes, yes, I've seen it. But the thing is, for our store and our recall plan is basically. I mean, the thing is, once the product is out, I mean, it goes to the different stores. There is no way of getting the stuff back. It's not like me issuing recall back to the supermarket chains and say, listen, I want everything back. Because we were selling it in the per dozen section. So it's easy for me to get the product back. But uh, but nowadays, I mean, when they pick up the bagels, those bagels are gone. I mean, they are already used up by the end of the day.
okay.
By end of the next day, they are gone.
So you would include, that your expiration date, whatever's in 2 days. You would include that information, but you still have to have a recall plan, regardless, right? Because it might have only been a day. You might have to contact your wholesalers, and then they would have to contact the people they sold it to either
Okay.
get the product back or
Yes.
have them destroy it.
Right. Okay. No problem.
Yeah. I know it's annoying because it's a short shelf life, but it's still a thing. Okay, so then we've got implementation records. So this would be the records that I generate every day because I'm following those procedures that I wrote for the food safety plan. And so I'll have the monitoring records, like the record where I write down, my temperature checks. What was the temperature? What time did we take the temperature? Who did it? All that. Corrective action records, and then any records of the validation, like the calibration and the record review.
Okay.
All right. And there are a good amount of rules around record keeping. So, you have to keep your original record, even if that record gets damaged somehow, right? Or it's messy or whatever. You have to keep your original records. Which means, like, if you have an employee who writes something down on a scrap piece of paper, that's technically the original record. So we try to teach people to write on their company records if they have written records. If somebody writes on a scrap paper, that has to be stapled to your record And then the records are required to be kept for 2 years. So that could make things challenging if you're trying to keep track of, like, a scrap of paper. So, thinking about original records, we use permanent ink. When we think about like the different use applications for your inks, like if I'm working in an environment where I'm using alcohol spray, if I have permanent marker, that's going to run. So just make sure you're adjusting for the working environment. You don't want anything that's erasable, right? So no pencil, no erasable pens, no whiteout. Essentially, the government doesn't want anyone to commit fraud, so they're like trying to put things in place to manage that.
Right.
If a mistake is made, you draw a single line through, and then sign and date. Um, if you then you would write, whatever correction you're going to make, and maybe if you need to make a note, you make a note. Of course, legibility is important, and you're supposed to record at the same time you're doing something. So, like, I look at the thermometer, I write it down. I don't look at it and then write it down 5 minutes later. Um, a problem that a lot of companies run into is like employees will pre-fill out documentation, which is also a no-go. Yeah, because it could be potentially considered fraud. Pencil whipping is also a common problem that auditors see, where like when they pre-fill it out, it'll be like the same numbers over and over again, or it'll have a weird slant, like it's clear that they did it all at once.
I see. Okay.
Okay, so those are the basic pieces outside of that for your electronic records. So the requirements for physical records and electronic records are the same. So you have to figure out how to do that digitally, which maybe you would get some help from family for that. If you decide to go with electronic records, security is important. So you want to make sure there's logins, usernames, passwords, or locks if you're using physical records. People do sometimes have somebody hack into their system and then their paperwork gets ransomed. So just be careful of that. The other issue would be like an employee goes in and they like change that log secretly. You don't want that to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned document management too in the beginning, because you're going to be generating a good amount of paperwork. You want to think about how you can store that in a way that's easy to retrieve if an auditor asks you for it, or if, within a day you have to have a recall for your bagels.
Right.
All right. So, there's another type of record, an exception record, that's only generated when you have a deviation from a critical limit. So, say you have a cooler and your cooler temperature is being tracked all the time by the instruments in the cooler. And it only generates a record when that cooler gets too warm, so we get above 40 Fahrenheit. So if we get above that critical limit, and that's when that exception record is generated. So you have to test those systems to show that they work for obvious reasons, because if they don't work, you could be having deviations and you don't know it.
Okay.
So you have to keep your records for 2 years. Shelf life doesn't matter for you. Let's see. For your records, you have to maintain your food safety plan on site, and any documentation around your equipment that has to be kept on site. They're considered on site if you can access them on a computer on site. So that part's relatively easy. If somebody asks you for your records, any inspector, auditor, government agency, you have 24 hours to give them records. And something to keep in mind when you're working on your records and deciding on how you're going to train your employees, these are legal documents. They absolutely can be subpoenaed in court. So it's just always important to keep that in mind when you're thinking about that. Not that I expect that will happen to you, but Sometimes companies get in legal trouble or they get sued. Okay, so for the last pieces of EG Food Company for their cook step, verification for the cook step. They review the cook log, which is their monitoring record, their corrective action records, and verification records within 7 days. They do daily accuracy checks of the thermometer, so that means they're like doing the quick check once a day to make sure it's correct, and then once a year they get it calibrated. They also do product testing for verification, and the validation study is a type of verification. For the records, the nice thing about the records section is you could literally draw like a one-to-one from the verification section to the record section. I review a cook log, I have to have a cook temperature log. I review a corrective action record, I have to have corrective action records. I have to do an accuracy check of a thermometer, I'm gonna have a record for that. Same for the calibration, same for the product testing, and for the validation study.
I see. Okay.
So we're gonna do a process control or a process preventive control for our peanut butter plan. And let's do the roasting step, because I think it'll be the best thing for you to see. So if we look at our roasting step, the roaster is pressurized, it's enclosed, and it's continuous, right? So we're constantly operating. We've got air going above and below the peanut bed. It's under positive pressure, and that bed depth is kept at 2 inches using a leveling device. The peanuts are exposed to a minimum of 300 Fahrenheit for 25 minutes. They are circulating that air to hit cold spots. They've done a validation study that shows that this process will give them a 5 log reduction of salmonella. And it says that bed depth, time, and temperature are all monitored during the continuous peanut roasting process. So that gives us a lot of good details. And so we are going to fill out the process preventive control form. So the step is roasting. The hazard would be pathogen survival of a lethal treatment. And for peanuts, they're concerned about salmonella primarily. So they gave us the temperatures, which was nice and convenient, right? They gave us the 300 Fahrenheit, 25 minutes, and 2-inch bed depth. And so we have to get to at least 300, so that's a minimum. So we would say peanuts reach minimum 300 Fahrenheit for at least 25 minutes. And the bed depth is 2 inches or less, because if it's more than that, we're not going to have full heat penetration, right? If it's too thick.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So thinking about a peanut roaster and how we would go about monitoring this. So it's an enclosed, pressurized system, which means this type of equipment probably has built-in sensors, right? So we've got like a built-in thermometer, we've got that leveler device, and we've got, some kind of interface that's tracking the time. So they also told us it's a continuous process, which means like we're slowly but surely feeding those peanuts in and continuously roasting throughout production. It's not a batch process like your process. So what we're monitoring is this guy, right? We want all those things to
Right.
happen,
To match.
right?
And we could check the temperature by taking a look at the temperature scale, I guess. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's going to show for how long, I guess,
Yes,
It should have
absolutely.
a timer or something on it.
So, they call it an HMI. It's a human machine interface. That's what they call the screen.
I see. Okay.
Interface, wait, screen. Outputs, time, temperature, and bed depth. So in this case, we're relying on the machinery to do the check rather than like a human checking once an hour or something, right? So the machine can do it continuously, and maybe an alarm sounds when we have a deviation. If your equipment couldn't do this, it couldn't continuously check, then you would have somebody come out and check it, right? So maybe we have, let's say about once every 2 hours or something, somebody comes and checks. If you had a human being like coming and physically looking, yeah.
Yes.
And in which case we would say employee visually inspects this screen. And then for who, we
Could be one of the employees, I guess.
yeah. So we could say operator or trained employee. We're good on that end. So then for the corrective action, what happens if we, for some reason, we haven't hit our time or our temperature or the peanut bed is too high?
We're going to have to, I guess, throw away the peanuts from the last time we checked.
Yeah, so we're going to go back to the last good check. And so we have to evaluate the product. And by that, yeah, we might have to throw away. So discard is the term they use for throw away. So discard. Rework. So that's if we could like reprocess the peanuts. So we could like maybe send them back through to re-roast. Or release. So in the case like you evaluate the product and you're like, well, it's still fine. We can sell it. This re-roast is not an actual word. Okay, and then for the like what caused the problem, so we have to say find root cause. Was it a machine issue? Was it an employee error? Whatever the case may be. And then we can just go vague and say retrain or correct as appropriate. That if the machine breaks, it would be like we do maintenance, we find what caused the issue, we fix it. If it was an employee error, maybe we retrain them. Maybe we talk to them about like why it happened, what they're doing, what caused them to do it, and see if there's any deeper issues. Okay, so now that we've got that, we would think about verification. How would we verify that the system's working the way we wrote it, and that it's handling the hazard?
Well, I would have to go and maybe start checking it whether the employees doing their job or not.
Absolutely.
So that's part of the verification, I guess.
So we could say review employee performance of monitoring and roasting stats by viewing them, doing this, following the procedure. Excellent. So we see if the employee is doing their job right. We have the record review, so we would have to review
View the records. Okay.
Yeah, so the monitoring record, which maybe we would call it the roasting log. Right, so that's your monitoring record. Uh, I like So when I teach, I like to include like what the likely name is, and including to like what we call it regulatory in the regulatory system, because most companies they use different terminology for all their documents, right? There isn't like a uniformity out there with everyone saying this is our monitoring log. No, it's a
Okay.
cook log, a sanitation record, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so then also the corrective action record needs to be reviewed, and any verification records that they have will have to be reviewed. So like we would have to review the record of like the fact that we watched our employee do their job. Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's gonna be a calibration of the monitoring instruments, right? So the timer, thermometer, um, and the bed leveler. And then we would also have to have a validation study, which they mentioned a few times in the description.
Okay, but the validation study could be like, just me validating, me saying that I checked online, I use different references so to say that whatever I'm doing here would make the product safer, I guess.
There's that, and you have to like show that the equipment is capable of that. Um, so in other words, like I run a batch and I do a study where I show that my equipment can get to the right temperature for the right amount of time to get the product to the right temperature for the right amount of time.
Okay.
So it's both. Yeah.
Both.
Yeah, because you have to show that specific equipment can. That, for in the case of a metal detector, you can use like a manufacturer's validation study, so you don't have to do it on your own. But you would have to figure out like for your oven, you would do your test on your oven. Okay, so now all we've got left is our record section. And so for our records, we've got this employee performance review record. We've got these records that we've listed here. We've got a record of the calibration. And then the validation study also counts as a record.
Okay. Process quality control. So in my case, it would be baking. Okay. And then main hazard would be, survival of E. coli.
Yep.
Then parameter values of critical it will be I would have to look it up at what temperature E. coli can be killed, and that would go into what and how with that would be my guy checking the temperature for the oven.
Yep.
And frequency once a month or once a week or once a day.
Yeah.
But operator and corrective action would be the same thing like you say here. And then it has to reach that point. The verification is verification, and same thing with the records. That's going to go into that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, kind of start making sense now.
Yeah.
So that would be my preventive control.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would definitely choose more often than once a month for your process. I would choose once a day at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the guy's going to fill out the paperwork and they just keep it on file, I guess.
Yeah, you would keep it on file.
Okay,
So,
so that would be like I just keep a folder upstairs every day. Somebody fill it out.
hmm
They're gonna write down their name and stuff, and that's it. We're gonna just start putting it in the folder. So this process preventive control has to be done every day, I guess, but not the biological hazard analysis. That don't need to be get done every day,
no.
right? I do it and that's it. You know, that's part of the food safety plan.
And
Then
then, yeah, you only have to do it again if you have to reanalyze your food safety plan.
okay,
So
got it.
it's that once every 3 years requirement, or if there's any significant changes. That's
Okay,
the only time you redo
like
that
the
analysis.
yellow number 5 is gonna get changed.
Yes.
Then they have to mandate, I guess,
Yes.
into safety plan. Okay, got it.
hmm
So uh, and once I have a recall plan, unless something goes wrong, I don't have to do anything about that, right?
Right. Some companies choose to do mock recalls where they'll like test their recall system.
Right.
So you can do that. But once you write the recall plan, you should be good. You would if you have like so say you designate somebody as like doing a specific job in the recall plan. If they leave, like you would need to make sure you update contact information and things like that.
Well, that would have to be me because I don't want to take a chance of something going wrong and not being there. I'm
Yeah,
there, I'll be there all the time, but if I'm going on vacation or I'm off, then
you need somebody else to be doing it. So
that
you'll have to
right.
appoint somebody to do stuff if you're not there.
But that person that I'm going to appoint does not need to have the PCQI, right?
No, they
The
don't have to have the PCQI.
okay, cool.
They just, yeah, you just have to tell them how to do the recall plan. And what I was saying about people leaving, like if, say, somebody quits, right?
Right.
And you had included them on your food safety, on your recall team, then you would want to make sure you update the recall plan because you have contact information in the recall
Yes.
plan. So
Okay.
that person's not there anymore. We don't need their contact information. We need the new hire's contact information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Or maybe like your customers change and you have to change your customer contact information.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Awesome. So next we will talk about our allergen preventive controls. So we went through the process preventive controls. All the things that are in process preventive controls are in the other types of preventive controls. So we have the critical limits, the monitoring, the corrective actions, the verification, and the records. So that's in every single one.
Okay.
Some preventive controls have some extra pieces. So like this, the allergen controls, you get a few extra pieces.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked a lot about labeling as a allergen preventive control, cross contact prevention, which you are going to change your system so you don't have to worry about. There is some overlap between allergen management through good manufacturing practices and what you would do for allergen preventive controls. So, if I'm looking at my processes and I'm trying to decide, is this thing I'm doing, is it an allergen preventive control or a good manufacturing practice? I ask myself, if this particular thing were to fail, if this process were to fail, would I likely end up with unsafe product? And if the answer is yes, then it's probably a preventive control. And if the answer is no, it is probably a GMP.
Okay.
So that's the easiest way to decide. Um, so outside of the label and cross contact, the other part for allergen management is around supply chain management. So we talked about what if your supplier handles other allergens? How does that affect your product that you're purchasing from them? So you have to think about how are your suppliers managing allergens on site if they're managing allergens that you aren't purchasing from them, right? Are they communicating to you that there are allergens in the products that you're purchasing? And then they also have to communicate to you if they make any changes to that product. So say they change the ingredient list, that could change the allergen declaration on your end. So you need to know that.
Okay, but you know what? With the food allergens, thing is bagels. If you really think about it, it has maybe out of the nine major food allergens, it has four already. It has wheat,
Yep.
it has milk,
Yep.
and I could also say it has egg too, and now sesame seed.
Uh huh.
So out of the nine, I have four allergens already. That could be,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm sorry. It just mean there's no way of me keeping them separate because it's going to be made in the same oven.
Yeah. So that's why you're using the same allergen profile for all your products. Yeah.
Okay, so
I'm
all
talking
right,
about
so
your I'm talking about your suppliers, the people who are
right,
shipping you stuff, right? You would look to them to say, this ingredient that you have, you're sending me flour. Is there a
right,
chance there's another allergen in it? Do you like some flour mills, flour companies? They'll also like make soy flour or something like that, rice
right.
flour.
Okay,
So if so you would say, do you process other allergens, and if so, do you have an allergen management program? Right.
okay,
That's what you have to do for your supply chain management for
okay.
allergens. Yeah.
And the label content and label management, that's up to me to make.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
so roast contact control will be taken care of by me saying that we're using the
Yes.
sesame seed oil.
Right.
Otherwise, forget it. If I don't say that, then there's no way of me separating plain bagel from sesame bagel
Yeah. So
because it's being made in the same oven.
yeah, exactly. So you're just gonna put sesame and everything and call it a day.
Okay.
Yep. Um, there is one other thing that we have to talk about for suppliers. So, say you get an ingredient, and on the packaging it says, made in a facility that also processes this allergen or may contain.
Right.
Those statements are not legally required, and they don't serve as legal protection for bad allergen management.
Okay.
So, some companies will use that, trying to get away with not having proper allergen management. And so, if you see a company that has that, it's a sign for you to maybe do a little extra check on that supplier and see, like, are they actually managing the allergens?
Okay.
Okay. So, the first document you'll have for your allergen controls is this ingredient allergen identification. So, we list all the ingredients that we have. We list the supplier and we mark which allergen that ingredient contains. I've seen some companies that have this like blown up into a big poster in their receiving area, and on it they will have like a color and a symbol for each allergen that'll be marked on there. That way, when somebody looks at an ingredient, they can check the poster and they know, oh, okay, this one goes where the blue stars go, you know.
Okay.
And symbols because people might be colorblind. Okay, so then we move on to our production line assessment, and we list all of the products. We list what line they're made on, and in the case of EG Food Company, everything's made on the same line. Same for your products. They mark which allergens are in each product. It makes it really easy to see when you have a unique allergen, which they do in the case of the biscuit. It has the wheat. And so below this, they list their scheduling implications. So they're going to schedule their plain omelet and the cheese omelet first, and then do the biscuit last. That makes it less likely they will end up with wheat in the other products, right? And then
Okay.
after they run the wheat, they do an allergen clean. And they're using the visually clean standard too. So they just clean until it's visually clean.
I see. Okay. It's like me making the plain bagel dough first, and
Yep.
then making the egg bagel dough, I guess,
Yes.
and then and how often do I need to do this? The production line food allergen assessment.
So this is just a one. So whenever you first put together your food safety plan, and when you reanalyze it, those are the only two times you need to make this form. Same with this form. So
Okay.
this one and this one and this one, they're going to be made at the same time you're building your food safety plan, and then edited when you review it.
Okay.
So say you like added a new product to your lineup, you might like go back to that form and say, hey, do we need to change this?
Okay.
Okay. So then for their two allergen controls, which we saw listed in the hazard analysis, right? When they receive the labels, they check for the allergen, and then when they put the label on, they check for the allergen. This is the form that they use. It looks just like the process preventive control form, right? Um, so the step is receiving the packaging, the hazard, undeclared allergens. They list each one. The criteria is that all the cartons that they receive have that allergen declaration, and that declaration is correct. So when they receive them to monitor it, they just do a visual inspection. Their label coordinator, every time they receive the labels, checks. And if the label's wrong, maybe it's misprinted, maybe it's missing an allergen, maybe they sent them the wrong labels, they reject the labels. And they still have to list, identify root cause, and conduct training, or correct as appropriate. For verification for this, it's just record review. So we're going to have a log for that monitoring for checking the label when we receive it. So it's probably a receiving log, right? So we review the receiving log. And if we have to do a corrective action, we'll have a corrective action record. So we would have to review the corrective action record. And so the reviewing of those records is your verification. So we have to document that we did that verification.
Okay.
And so those are our logs, right? The allergen label receiving check log, the corrective action record, and the verification of those records. Then we've got the pack, weigh, label step. So this is when they're putting the label on. The hazard is the same. The criterion is a little different. In this case, we want to make sure that the product and the label match, right? We've got the right label on the right product, and it has the allergen declaration.
Right.
So to that end, they're doing a visual inspection. Some companies will do this with like barcode scanners or like those little stripes that you see on the side of a label. But most often when companies are just starting these programs, it's a visual inspection. So they do a visual inspection of the carton to make sure it matches the product number. And they do it at the beginning and end of a run, so the beginning and end of a product run, and anytime they change the label stock. So we're trying to hit all the points where we could accidentally put on the wrong label. In addition to that, sometimes when people receive labels, there are misprints in the middle of a roll. So it's worth doing a little extra check in between, just in case. So you would catch it if that's the case.
No, it has happened to me before that we had two kind of packages.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, what happened was it kind of got mixed. So with the supermarkets, it had to be in a special kind of package. It happened to me long time ago, about 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we used the wrong baggage by mistake, and it had a different number. The barcode was not the same. And when then I got a call from the supermarket saying that, hey, your packaging is all messed up.
Mm-hmm.
Even the product inside was the same, but the ingredient label was wrong. So that's why they made a big deal about it.
Yeah.
We ended up giving them the money back for the whole shipment because whatever they had, it was like either I'm going to have to pay somebody to bring everything back,
Mm-hmm.
or I just pay them for the product and they throw everything in the garbage.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me at that time. So they kind of understand. Okay, no problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really frustrating because it's a very expensive thing to have to deal with, and so easy to happen.
Right.
Yeah. And it, like, if you look at the numbers, it causes like 30 to 50% of recalls every single year. That number has not changed in all the time I've been working in the food industry. So, yeah. So for the corrective action, in this case, they're gonna go back to the last good check, relabel, and then we include identify root cause and conduct training, prevent recurrence. The verification is the same as the other one, it's just record review. So we review the label check log and the corrective action records and the verification records, and then those are the records that they've listed. This is a breakdown of supply chain management for your allergens, right? So checking to see if that supplier is managing other allergens. Are they doing that effectively? Do they communicate to you if they make substitutions? And then that precautionary labeling, do we need to adjust? All right, so then we're going to do an allergen control for the peanut butter. And I'm going to switch screens again to our workbook. Okay, so we're going to list our ingredients first. All right, so we have the peanuts, the sugar, the vegetable oil, salt, and then in the other product there's that milk chocolate swirl, right? So milk chocolate. And then we mark which allergens are in what products.
Okay.
So of course there's peanut in peanuts,
Right.
and then milk in the milk chocolate. And then remember they said the vegetable oil, it's so refined that it doesn't cause an allergic reaction,
Right.
so we don't have to mark soy.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the first form. Second
Okay.
form, we're going to list the product's names. So we've got creamy, chunky. Let me move this window. That's better. Extra chunky. And our peanut butter chocolate swirl. Okay. And the peanut butter process is the same for all of them. The only difference for the products is that filler head. So the filler bowl and the filler head for the chocolate is separate. So everything's made on the same production line except for that filler head. So I'm going to name the filler heads different things. So we've got filler head 1 for our peanut butters and filler head 2 for the chocolate swirl.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So then we mark our allergens again. So they've got peanuts in all of them.
Right.
And then this one has milk.
Milk. Right. Okay.
So just like you would run your scheduling, the plain first and then the other.
Right. Other flavor last.
Yeah.
Okay.
How would you set up the run order? Like how would you run the peanut butter products so that we don't end up with chocolate and anything else?
Yeah, first do first do creamy chunky and extra chunky, and the last we'll do the chocolate swirl, I guess.
Excellent. Okay. And then, so when would we do the allergen clean?
At the end, when we finish the chocolate swirl.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then we have to come up with our allergen statement for our products. So we know we've got peanuts in all of them and milk in the chocolate swirl. What should the allergen statement be for our creamy? Contains what?
Peanuts and milk. Peanuts and milk.
Peanuts. So we'll just say peanuts and milk for the chocolate swirl, and the rest will just be contains peanuts.
Okay, but don't you think it's safe to say might contain milk for older form or no?
So
because milk is being used in the facility.
It's being used in the facility, yes, but we're going to put controls in place so that we don't have milk in the other ones. That's like...
Okay, but are we like, you know how on some products it says made in the same facility that processes sesame seed or the peanuts or the peanuts?
Yes,
would
so those
pay.
statements, most companies use those statements because it makes it less likely they're gonna get sued because the customer is like aware that they have it in their facility at that point.
Right.
But technically, it doesn't protect you legally. Um, like if you say may contains and somebody hasn't, so I say may contains milk, and somebody eats the creamy peanut butter and they have a milk allergy and they have a reaction, technically I'm still legally liable, even though I have a may contain statement. Um, so it's we cannot use a may contain statement as like an excuse to not clean. Like we still have to clean and sanitize, and honestly, the FDA prefers that we don't use may contain statements.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Um, yeah, I think, for me, if I was setting up my company and I was thinking about it ethically, I might make the choice for ethically. But from a legal standpoint, it's not super helpful.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean the thing is, all the people that are coming into my store, so 99% of them are aware that we really can separate the sesame seeds from the regular bagels.
Hmm.
So you think, am I doing the right thing by just saying that we are using sesame oil? You know,
You're not going to say may contains, you're going to say contains.
right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then that should be taking care of the issue, I guess, right?
Yes.
Okay,
You don't need any may contain statements. You're just going to say
right.
contains. And all your
Okay,
products will have the same allergens.
okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so now we get to write up an allergen control. We can do it for receiving labels or for putting on the labels. Do you have a preference?
No.
Okay. Let's do the labeling step since we did it in the hazard analysis just to have follow through and consistency.
Sure.
So, labeling undeclared allergens, peanut butter, and then milk in the peanut butter chocolate swirl. Okay, so in this case, we want to make sure that do not need to be in caps lock, all finished product has a correct label with allergen declaration.
പഠിച്ചേ
Okay, so now we got to think about how we would monitor this. So, if you were thinking about, labeling a product, how would you check to make sure that you have the right label on the product?
Well, the ones with the peanut mean with the milk chocolate, I would have to see it if it has milk chocolate or not, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and visually, I guess, see it. So am I packing the right stuff or not?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right? So, sometimes this is worded differently depending on what they're checking. So, like, maybe I'm checking the product number on label matches product or something like that.
Okay,
Just depends on how your system is set up.
okay.
And then, so we're gonna do this.
Once a day.
We're gonna do it more often than that. So the at beginning and end of product run, because we might run multiple products in a day, right? So if we run all four, I want to make sure I have the right label for the plain peanut butter stuff and then the right label for the peanut butter chocolate.
Okay.
And any label changeover. So say I run out of labels in the middle and I send somebody to go get more labels. I want to check again to make sure that the right label goes on.
Okay.
Um, and then we can just have our line operator or trained employee do this. For the corrective action, so we're just gonna do what we always do, right? So we go back to the last good check, and then we would relabel. Which is nice and simple. We have to include find root cause and retrain or correct as appropriate. All right. So then I need to verify that this label check is being done.
I'll be just monitoring my employees while they're doing it.
You can do that. So we could say monitor employees during check. And then, of course, we also have the record review that we have to do. So we would review the monitoring record, which is probably like a labeling record. Or a labeling log. We have to review any corrective action records we have and the verification of those two records. Okay. So then those are the records that I will list here. So I've got the labeling log, which is for my monitoring record. I've got my corrective action records, and then verification records.
Got it.
Cool. So the next type of preventive control we're going to go through is sanitation. And timing-wise, I want to go through this preventive control, then we'll take a break, and then we'll do the rest.
Okay.
Yeah. As long as you're good with that.
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. So for the sanitation preventive controls, we talked about two hazards that require sanitation preventive controls. So pathogens, right? Specifically pathogens on food contact surfaces, and then those environmental pathogens, and then allergens. So our sanitation preventive controls work to prevent those in food contact surfaces and in any high-risk areas like we talked about. There is some overlap between allergens and sanitation management because we are cleaning to prevent allergen cross-contact. Well, some companies are. You will not be. Gratefully, you don't have to worry about that. Or won't have to worry about that when you make the changes to your system. And there's also some overlap with good manufacturing practices. So we ask ourselves the same question. If this procedure, in this case a sanitation procedure, were to fail, how bad would it be? If I don't potentially have unsafe product because this part failed, it's probably a GMP.
Got it.
Okay, so then we've got hygienic zoning. So we're zoning based on risk. So in areas where your bagels are exposed to the environment right after they get baked and before that goes into the package, right? That one specific area, that's your highest risk area.
Right.
And then you'll have other zones that'll be less risky. And so we group them based on that risk level. Like non-manufacturing is the lowest risk. Transition areas are not going to be the highest risk, but they're fairly risky in that you've got people and products running through and so can move potential contaminants through your facility. And then you've got your GMP areas, which there's some risk, but it's not as intense as the other ones. So we have zones 1 through 4. Zone 1 is the highest risk. Zone 4 is the lowest risk. Unless you add more zones, right? So the higher the number, the lower the risk. So for e.g. Food Company, that assemble wrap area is their primary pathogen control area. That's their zone 1. Then they've got the transition areas, zone 2. Their GMP areas is zone 3, and non-manufacturing is zone 4. There's also an additional type of zoning that you may be familiar with, where they say zone 1, the highest risk is food contact surfaces. Zone 2 is adjacent to that, like within a certain number of feet, and zone 3 adjacent to that within a certain number of feet, and then zone 4 and so on. Those zones are generally used for like dictating where you swab and how often you swab when you have an environmental monitoring program where you're looking for pathogens.
Okay.
The nice thing about having a hygienic zoning map and setting things up this way, you can look at your system and understand where there are likely contamination points. Like in e.g. Food Company, they've got the men's room here, adjacent to the cook area and the assemble wrap area. The assemble wrap area, which is a high risk, cook area, has no wall, so we could see pathogens travel from the men's room to these higher risk areas.
Got it.
Yeah. So that means we just keep a closer eye on it. Sanitation verification gets a little bit more in depth than the allergen one. We still have record review as a part of it, and the observing employees as a part of it. But then there's also the swabbing, which I've been talking about, right? So swabs for allergens. There's also ATP swabs. Are you familiar with ATP swabs?
No.
Okay. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. What it is it's an energy molecule that every single living thing on the planet uses, right? Whether it's a bacteria, a plant, a person, an animal, we all have ATP inside of us.
Okay.
Okay, so the P part of ATP is phosphorus. Phosphorus glows, right? So, like, this technology is actually based on a firefly. You know, a firefly's butt will glow.
Right.
That's the phosphorus glowing. So, what they've done is they've created this machine where you take a swab, you put the swab into the machine, and then it glows. And based on how brightly it glows, tells you how much phosphorus is there. So, it tells you how clean or dirty the surface is.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's cool. Science nerd stuff. You can also leave out contact plates. So if you've ever seen in microbiology, they have like those little dishes, the petri dishes, and it'll have like this. Yeah. So you would leave one of those out with a gelatin in it, and then leave it open to the air, and then close it, put it in an incubator, and see what grows. And that can give you an idea of like what's in the air in your facility.
I see.
Yeah. When companies are doing environmental monitoring, they're like swabbing and looking for microbes. They're basically trying to get like a baseline of what lives in their facility, right? Like what's normal, because there are microbes everywhere, right?
Right.
And so you want to know like what's normal for us and what means we're having a problem. And so if I'm tracking and trending data from swabbing, then I would be able to track to know that I'm developing a problem or that I'm not. Not something for you to worry about yet, but just knowledge for the future.
Okay.
Yeah. It can also help you find like the source of an issue, like where is the actual contamination coming from? Because sometimes it's a place like companies don't expect. Like I was talking to one woman who was managing their environmental monitoring program, and she said that they kept getting salmonella hits, and their product couldn't figure out the source, and finally figured somebody swapped like a random hole in the wall, and the salmonella was living in the wall,
I see.
like a legit monster from a scary movie. Yeah.
Okay.
So, can be really useful. So this is the first of the 3 examples of e.g. Food Company's sanitation preventive control. The first one is the sanitation of the food contact surfaces. So They want to make sure that all their food contact equipment is clean and sanitized according to the procedure and there's no visible residue. So there's that minimum requirement. And then to check that, they're checking the sanitizer concentration before they clean. And then they're checking to see that the surface is visibly clean after they clean. Because it's a sanitation control, we're including a correction with the corrective action. Because remember, we might not have made products, so we just need to re-clean, re-sanitize.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And then we still have to have the corrective action in case we made product anyway. Like maybe somebody messed up and they made product, in which case we just hold and evaluate the product and retrain the employee. To verify, again, it's record review in this case. So we review the sanitation log and the allergen run order log within 7 days. And then those will be our records. And it's an allergen run order log because we're cleaning for allergens too for this. The second one, this is the environmental one that you're asking about. So it's almost exactly the same as the food contact surface one, except we get a few more documents. So the criteria, the monitoring, that's all the same. The verification is different. They have a pre-op inspection list and environmental monitoring for the environmental cleaning. And so that changes the records that they need, right? Because in addition to your sanitation records and your corrective action records, you need the pre-op inspection check sheet and the environmental monitoring records. And then the last one is hygienic zoning. So this is the one where they have their employees following specific practices in this high hygiene zone, this high risk area. And to monitor that, their supervisor visually observes those employees to make sure they're wearing proper clothing and footwear when they start, after they have a lunch break, and then every 2 hours. Correction, nice and easy. Correct employees. Corrective action, retrain employees. The verification is environmental monitoring. And then the records, they have a hygienic zoning record, the environmental monitoring record, and the corrective action records. So those are our 3 sanitation controls from EG Food Company. For this exercise, I like to model what we do after these because it makes it easier to understand. So would you like to do food contact surfaces for the exercise, the environmental sanitation, or the hygienic zoning?
Food contact surfaces.
Great. So food contact, cleaning and sanitizing, no visible residue, checking sanitizer, doing the visual inspection. Cool. Sanitation log. Okay, so I'm going to bring up our exercise book again. And you'll notice like some of these forms are horizontal, some of them are vertical.
Right.
You can choose whichever orientation you prefer. I honestly think this one's a little bit better.
Yes, that is better than the other ones,
Mm-hmm.
So I could change that for the other ones as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And how do I do that in the builder?
I've never had to use the builder.
Yes, ma'am.
But if I was going to do it in any document editing, I would look at what's in the vertical setup that's here, compare it to what I need for the other one, and just make sure the words match, right? So I would put allergen control, in place of process step. I would add a section for the hazard, and then the rest of it's pretty much the same.
Okay, so now I'll just leave it like that because you know why? I have an example for the EG company, and plus whatever I'm learning from you today, that's going to help me build my own, I guess.
Yeah.
Plus the online format that's there, for the food plan, is according to whatever you're showing me now.
Yeah.
So rather than worrying about changing this stuff around, just that's it. Just get through it, and that's it.
Yeah. That works. And then, if you feel, once you get to the point where you're comfortable. If you feel like you want to change it, you eventually can, or you just leave it, whatever makes you happy.
Yeah.
So we'll say for our step, cleaning and sanitizing of food contact surfaces. Okay. So do we want to just go with visually clean?
Yes, I guess so.
We'll say surface is visually clean and cleaned according to procedure. All right. So if we're just doing visually clean, this is really simple, right? So it's a visual inspection. The food contact surfaces are visually clean.
Right.
And then the frequency for this one, it makes sense to do it after I clean, right?
Right.
Maybe I do another inspection before we start production, just in case.
Yes. Yes.
And then who do we want to put in charge of it?
Whoever's making the stuff, I guess.
Okay. So operator or sanitation crew member. Yeah, whatever job title makes sense.
Right.
And then this one for correction.
Well, if it's not clean, then if it's not been fully clean, then you have to clean, sanitize,
Exactly. Re-clean and re-sanitize.
re-clean and re-sanitize.
And if we've made food at this point, we would have to evaluate that product. So evaluate suspected product. Retrain employee or correct as appropriate. There is potential for a sanitation corrective action being an issue with your equipment, like if you have a clean in place system and something in that clean in place system fails. All right, verification. So we would make it review employee cleaning performance, like you usually recommend, right? We watch the employee do their job.
Right.
We could review our sanitation records. And if we were swabbing, you could include an ATP swab if you wanted to. But not required, just an option.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and we would also want to review our corrective action records. And then those would be our records. And that's that. I like the sanitation ones, they're pretty straightforward.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
Got it. Well, okay. Let's take a break then. Let's do 15. We'll come back. We'll finish up everything. We should be done in less than an hour.
Okay. So see you in 15 minutes.
See you in 15. right. Let's do this. So, the last type of preventive control is the supply chain control. And it's important to think about like where you are in the system, right? And we are required to go one step back and one step forward in terms of um, understanding where hazard management is, right? So, in the example, we identified supply chain controls that we needed, right? Because we couldn't control a hazard. Sometimes that hazard's not going to be controlled by our direct supplier, it's going to be controlled by one of their suppliers, right? So, for example, for your cornmeal, the people who are making the cornmeal, they're probably purchasing corn from a farm. And uh, if I need the farmer to control for pesticides and for those mold toxins, um, then what's required for me, or for you, right, purchasing that cornmeal down the line for your bagels, is you would go to your direct supplier, the cornmeal supplier, and say, hey, or I guess in this case, a flour supplier, and then say, hey, do you have proof, like a certificate of analysis from that supplier that shows that they're controlling that hazard? So that's your due diligence part, right? Your flour manufacturer, they're probably purchasing cornmeal from somebody. You say, hey, do you have a supply chain control for that cornmeal producer? Okay,
Okay. Yes, I understand.
cool. It's a lot easier because if you need a supply chain control from your direct supplier, then you have to go audit them or send somebody to audit them. There's also like the in between, right? You've got like your distributors or people that hold product. Technically, they don't count as your direct supplier, right? The supplier is the one who manufactures the product, who raises the animal, who grows the food.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's in between the wholesaler I'm buying the stuff from, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm going to call up my wholesaler. The wholesaler is going to call the factory
Yeah.
to get the certificate of analysis, I guess.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh. And there are different requirements for the people who are just distributing or holding food, right? Who are selling to you, if you're
Right.
not a manufacturer. So something to keep in mind just for supply chain management of like, this may not be something that really makes sense until later, but like there are different levels of requirements for the regulations depending on what a company does, right? So like what the baby food manufacturer does is going to be different from what you do with your bagels. That's going to be different from what somebody who makes packaging does, and that's going to be different from what somebody who just holds product is required to do. So right, the lower the level of risk, like the less stuff you have to do for the regulations.
Okay, but as a supplier that who I'm buying the stuff from, there has to be some kind of rules or regulation for them to have certificate of analysis. Or if I'm requesting it, they should have to get back to me on that. It's not that
I wasn't
they're
saying
gonna
that
what.
yeah, I'm not saying there aren't rules. I'm saying the rules are different.
Okay, I see. Okay, and then like you said, if they're not willing to work with me, then I have to find a different supplier, I guess.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
supplier that is going to be willing to work with me, and then okay, cool.
Yeah.
I understand that part. No
Great.
problem.
Awesome. Yeah. Um, so for your supply chain program, when you do the hazard analysis and it's your direct supplier that's controlling the hazard, there are specific requirements that are extra, right? So that on-site audit, that has to be done once a year, whether it's done by you or somebody else. It has to happen once a year. Now, say you've been purchasing from a supplier for a long time and you haven't had issues with that product or that ingredient, you can use that performance as justification for that audit to be done less often. Maybe I do it once every 2 years or once every 3 years.
Okay, no problem. That's once a year. I mean, I just gotta get the paperwork from them.
Yeah.
Put the four main ingredients: that's the flour, cornmeal, salt, sugar, and the dough conditioner. That's just five papers that they gotta supply to me, I guess.
So there's a difference between the audit and the paperwork. So the paperwork you're gonna get, you determine how often you want that to happen, right? Maybe you do
Right.
it once a year, maybe you do it once a quarter. That'll depend on risk level. Like how risky is the hazard and how likely is it to happen. So just like in the hazard analysis, or like how likely is it to happen? How
Okay.
bad is it going to be? That's how you determine how often you want that paperwork. And then the audit is when somebody actually goes to that facility and they inspect it.
I see. Okay.
And then you can also review their food safety records as a part of supplier verification. So the FDA has a dashboard where you can look up a company and see if they've had any recalls, warning letters, any actions taken against them by the government.
Okay.
Okay. So, for some ingredients, you might not identify any hazards. Like that's really common with salt or like vinegar. So if we have no hazard, we got nothing to worry about. If we're controlling the hazard at our facility, like in EG Food Company, they control metal with their metal detector, so they don't need a supply chain control for like the cheese and the biscuit could potentially have metal, but
Right.
because they're controlling the hazard, they don't need a supply chain control. And then of course there's the hazard controlled by the supplier. Uh, if a customer downstream is controlling a hazard, like say you're sending to another manufacturer and they're processing the product and controlling the hazard, you don't need a supply chain control. You just need that documentation that says the customer is controlling the hazard. And if you are purchasing from another country, so you're following the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, that regulation supersedes this one. So you don't need to do both. You don't need to do Foreign Supply Verification Program and supply chain. You would just do the Foreign Supply Verification Program for those overseas products.
Okay.
And then lastly, if you're using food just for research, like you're coming up with a new bagel flavor and that's not getting to the customer yet, you don't have to have a supply chain control for it.
Okay.
So for our supply chain program, we are required to use approved suppliers. We have to decide what we're going to do to verify that those suppliers are controlling the hazards, then we have to actually do it. And then we document it, just like everything else. Say what you're going to do what you're going to say, then document it. When we have figured out who our approved suppliers are and we start receiving products, then we have to have receiving procedures. So what do I do to check and make sure that I got my product from an approved supplier or from my approved supplier? And so I'll have written receiving procedures that document, like, how do we check that this came from the right person? Did we get any documentation that's supposed to come along with it, like a certificate of analysis or whatever we're expecting? So when I'm going through my supplier approval process, I'm going to think about how they perform in general, what the storage and transportation practices are like around that product, which actual company or entity is controlling the hazard, how risky that hazard is, what level of risk are we looking at, and then, is my supplier pretty good about food safety management or compliance with regulatory requirements? And as you're collecting documentation from your suppliers, you'll be able to track and trend that data too. That will be helpful.
Okay.
Now, you might purchase from suppliers that are pretty small, right? Like you just hit that million mark and now you're having to follow the regulations, which means before you were a qualified facility. So if you purchase from qualified facilities, then you don't have to do supplier verification, right? For those facilities that are qualified facilities.
I see.
Yeah. And it's the same thing for farms that are too small to fall under the produce safety regulations, or shell egg producers that have less than 3,000 laying hens. I don't know who chooses the size requirements or why they chose 3,000 hens. That's what they chose. This is the QR code for the FDA data dashboard where you can see, what warning letters companies have had, any recalls, what happened during their inspections, all the things. So when it comes to your receiving procedures, um, either you write them or you have somebody else write them and then you review those receiving procedures and approve them. So, say you did hire someone to put together your receiving procedure, you would just say, okay, I've looked through, this looks good, sign off. In your receiving procedures, you have to make sure that you're writing in how do we check and make sure that this comes from the approved supplier, how are we documenting that? And then for your verification activities, it's the same situation as the receiving procedures. If you have somebody else write your verification activities or decide on them, then you have to review them, sign off on them. So, our options for verification activities, there's the audit. That's the only one that's absolutely required. The other ones we get to choose: sampling and testing, reviewing food safety records, or anything else. Um, you're probably going to end up doing all of them in most cases. They're very particular on who can do what type of verification activity. So, as the purchaser, I can audit my supplier, a third party, whether that's an SQF auditor or an FDA agent, USDA agent, a city inspector, um, whoever that is, they can do the audit, but it can't be that facility auditing itself. We can't use a self audit from the supplier. Then for testing, anyone can do testing and we can use that. And then record review has to be done by you as the receiving facility. We already talked about that. The person doing the audit, they have to be a qualified auditor. That means they understand the regulations and they understand the industry that they're auditing, right? And when the audit is done, the focus is on the product you're purchasing, right? So if I'm purchasing this particular thing, that's what I want the audit to focus on. Um, I
I
see.
understand, but in my case, do I have to get an audit done for the supplier?
If so, this is where it's like if you deem you need a supply chain control, so only for the ingredients that need a supply chain control, an audit would need to be done. And that audit could be done by you, by somebody you hire, by an FDA agent, by USDA, by a city inspector, right? This has to be done by somebody who's not working in that company.
No, I understand there, but the thing is, so you're talking about this audit being done from for the supplier that I'm buying the food from, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the thing is, how do I know? The thing is, how can I like get them to do this?
You're not.
If not,
They're not
mean,
doing the audit. You're doing that. They will. So it's a part of supply chain controls. It's part of the regulation. So like they have to agree to let an audit being done.
I understand, but the thing is, I'm just a small guy.
Yeah.
The thing is, not like I'm doing millions of dollars of sales. I'm not buying enough from them for them to be even say that, listen, we're going to let you do an audit. They're not going to let me come in to their warehouse and do an audit.
I mean, it's a part of the regulation. I
So how, the thing is, that's where I'm a little confused too. Like, okay, it says, so you mean you're saying that the regulation is saying that I have to do an audit for the person I'm buying the flour from, the sugar from, salt from, right?
not all of them. Only the ones you need supply chain controls for, right? So sugar, no identifiable significant
Right.
hazards. Salt,
Salt,
no
no,
significant hazards.
right.
Flour, if you write it as a control measure, no significant hazards, right, that need a supply chain control. If you write it as a preventive control, then you would have to audit the flour company. So it depends on the hazard analysis.
Okay, but the thing is, on the hazard analysis, so I got to worry about E. coli, microfactors, this and that.
So
So,
E. coli, you control that hazard. You don't need a supply chain control.
okay, so what do I need supply chain control for?
So mycotoxins is the only potential supply chain control that we've identified.
Right.
So, yeah, and that depends on how you write your hazard analysis. So if you choose to make the mycotoxins a supply chain control, then that's going to be the one you're going to have to audit or have somebody audit the flour supplier. If you choose to make it a control measure, then we don't need to have somebody do the audit. But you still want to get those certificates of analysis.
I see. So once I get the certificate of analysis, that's going to help me, I guess.
It
Now, but
does.
for the audit,
Yes. It helps you in knowing that the hazard is being controlled. And that would be a part of your control measure if you decide it's not a preventive control, like a supply chain preventive control. Do you see what I'm saying? We're using control measure as that level in between, right? Remember we had the GMPs and prerequisite programs, and then
right,
in the middle, the operational prerequisite program and control measures, and
right,
then critical level, preventive control. So
right,
if you want to not have to audit, you would write the mycotoxins as a control measure as opposed to a supply chain control. And you would say, we're controlling this by having this process where we send a questionnaire to the supplier and then we require them to give us a certificate of analysis. Maybe we do our own testing every now and again, and we've decided that's enough to make sure it's safe, right? So that's where you would start if you don't want to be auditing your supplier.
I see.
And
Okay,
then see what your inspector says, you know?
okay,
It,
got it.
I know it works for a big flour company that I teach sometimes, so it might work for you.
Okay,
Um, and you would still have to, your other ingredients you would evaluate too. Like we know yeast, no likely hazards that will need a preventive control. But if there's anything else, right, like some of those, like if I were you, like I would have to deep dive into this different seeds and stuff just to be sure. Because I don't know all those hazards offhand off the top of my head.
okay, yeah. I mean, I would have to go through the FDA list
Yeah.
and see what kind of hazards are there, and then go from there, I guess.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. We talked about sampling and testing and who can do it. Reviewing of records. Okay, so say you find out that your supplier is no longer controlling a hazard. Like you get a certificate of analysis that says, oh, the mycotoxins are too high. Or maybe somebody does go and audit the facility and they find that the supplier is not controlling for humidity and we've got rampant growth of mold, right? So we know that the supplier is not controlling the hazard. Then we have to stop using the supplier until they fix the problem. And we have to get rid of any of the ingredients that we have from them and any products that we have on site that have that ingredient.
Got it.
Okay. And then we would notify them, of course. And you could choose to help them fix the problem. You don't have to, but you could choose to. And then if you feel like your supply chain control program needs to be better as a result, then you would revise the supply chain program because there's a chance that there's something that you missed in your approval process for your suppliers. And then if you have to do a recall, then you work with the supplier to conduct the recall. So the supply chain control looks quite a bit different than the other ones. We still list, we list the ingredient, right? So for EG Food Company, it's the cheese that we've been working on. We list the supplier, and the location does matter because it has to be the location that was audited. And then the hazard in this case is recontamination with environmental pathogens, listeria. So when the cheese gets sliced, we could end up with listeria in the cheese. And so the control is a sanitation control, and they verify that sanitation control through environmental monitoring. So what they're going to do what EG Food Company is going to do to verify that this cheese company is implementing the sanitation control, they're going to have a third-party audit done by a qualified auditor to verify that they're controlling the hazard, that their supplier is controlling the hazard. And once a year, they get that audit. They review it for the date, the auditor qualifications, the procedures that were followed during the audit, and the results. Right? So that means somebody did a deep dive. They looked at the report. They're like, okay, this looks sound. They're controlling the hazards. The corrective actions here that are listed are the same as they were on the slides previously. And then for records, you have that audit report.
Right.
And then any other verification and corrective action documentation you might have. So that might be certificates of analysis, a corrective action record, things like that. Now, the other difference with the supply chain control is that you also have that receiving procedure that you have to write. Yeah. So the receiving procedure for EG Food Company looks like this. So every time they get ingredients, they want to make sure they come from their approved suppliers and those suppliers need to have the right controls in place. So every delivery, their receiving clerk verifies that the cheese comes from Cheesy Co., located in Cowtown, USA, right? So we're checking the manufacturer and the location. And they do that by checking the bill of lading and the manufacturer's name on the boxes, right, on the cases. They do the same thing for the biscuits. And if the product doesn't come from an approved supplier, they reject the shipment. And then that gets documented on their receiving log. If the product comes from an unapproved supplier, so somebody else, then they reject the shipment and they tell the plant manager. For their records, they have a receiving log, bill of lading, correction record, and verification record. So notice this is a correction, not a corrective action, because we're just rejecting the shipment. We never took in unsafe product.
Right.
And then verification is just record review. So both of these pieces are going to get written for your supply chain control. So it is considerably different from the other types of preventive controls.
Okay.
Cool. So we're going to do a supply chain control for our peanut butter. And we will do it for aflatoxin for the peanuts, because they gave us good information about it. So our peanuts, the hazard is that mold toxin, aflatoxin. And they told us the supplier was sorting out moldy peanuts and submitting a certificate of analysis once a quarter. Okay. So now that we know what our supplier is doing to control aflatoxin in peanuts, we think of our peanut butter company. What can we do to ensure or to check to see that our supplier is in fact controlling for this aflatoxin in the moldy peanuts? So we can do something similar to EG Food Company. We can say third-party audit. Once per year. And we have that certificate of analysis. And maybe we also do testing to verify. Maybe twice annually, peanuts are sent to a third-party lab for testing. So these are all just examples of what you could do.
Okay.
Okay, so it does get a little confusing, like verification activities versus verification procedures.
Right.
So if a third-party audit is done as an activity, the procedure would be to review the third-party audit. And I really wish they hadn't worded it this way. Like I hate this one, this exercise. We can review the certificate of analysis. And we can review the third-party test results.
they put so many things into this law and all. But the thing is, the bottom line is you want to prevent people from making mistakes, and knowing that, that you want to make sure the food is being safe. And that should be the goal. It's like, what, you want to go into more of this paperwork, because I'm sorry, but, come on, it's just, more these people want to get involved, the more problems there are, and
Mm-hmm.
some people just make basic mistakes,
Yep.
like you said, with the company with the peanut butter, they have so many problems in their facility, and then that leads to people getting sick,
Yep.
and then that leads to this one, and it's like one verification after the other, one verification
Mm-hmm.
after the other. Come on, and then they still have issues,
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like, I know that. All right, we just gotta go with the flow. Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah. Our government systems are far from perfect. They're doing what they've figured out so far, and also what people have lobbied for, which, you know, take it or leave it, however our government is set up. Um, and this is what we got. You know, I don't. It's definitely not how I would set it up, but it is what it is.
I understand. That's
Yeah.
what it is, and it's just when the inspector came to the store too, it's like, these people, they know. I bet you anything, if you test him on this stuff, he probably wouldn't even know. He'd be
Mm-hmm.
like 60, 70% of the knowledge that he would have. If I ask him to write up a, if you're doing a food safety plan for my store, he'd be in the la la land too. I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, but just these people, and they're gonna come to check. They want to come to check my food safety plan, and are they really qualified to do it? I'm not so sure.
I mean, they should be.
They should,
I
yes,
would
yes,
hope
they should
that
be,
whoever is
yes,
hiring is doing a good vetting process.
yes. I hope so too. But let's see what I'm going
Yeah.
to go through once they're going to come by to check.
Yeah. Yeah. I know for a lot of auditors, the qualifications are pretty intense. I would be surprised if they weren't intense for your inspectors in New York. Um, but then again, time and funding and people gets limited, so you never know what's happening in a system.
Yes.
Okay, so for corrective actions for this one, we are going to stop purchasing from the supplier until corrective action is done, and remove all ingredients, all affected product and ingredients. From facility, recall if necessary. Okay, and then we're gonna have records for these things, right? So we're gonna have records of all these verification activities.
Hey everyone, hope they're having a good day.
Then I have the COA, records of third-party audit, COA, third-party test results, and then corrective action records. So a lot of verification for managing supply chain, a lot of records. A lot of this is about traceability. And hopefully, so when things happen, you can track where the source of the hazard originated. So once we finish with the first part, the actual supply chain control, then we have to write the receiving procedure.
Yeah, purpose is to check whether all the packages are in good shape, that they're not damaged.
Right. Well, really, what we're checking, that's part of it for sure, but we're also checking to make sure it comes from your approved supplier.
But why wouldn't it come from a approved supplier? I wouldn't order it from anybody else.
Maybe not for your company, but for another company, say somebody else did purchasing who was not aware of the approved supplier program, or who didn't realize that this particular ingredient required an approved supplier, then somebody in purchasing might make a mistake and order from somebody else.
Okay, let me ask you this: what if they be running out of flour that I use on a regular basis,
Yep.
and they send me a flour from a different company?
Yep.
So would that qualify as not receiving the flour from from
Yes.
the authorized dealer? I guess
Yeah, from the yeah, it would. So if they
It
switch
was
up what they send you, yeah, you can do like an emergency supplier approval, but you have to be able to justify that and the fact that it's okay as a PCQI. So, you can receive it. Just know that you're gonna have to like back it up.
okay.
Um,
Got it.
but yeah, so if your supplier, if whoever's sending you stuff is sending you stuff from multiple suppliers,
Right.
then your best bet, if you need a supply chain control, is to vet the multiple suppliers.
Right. I mean, let's say I'm getting flour. It rarely happens, but it does happen that what happened was one time I got flour from a mill that was different from
Yep.
the what we regularly get flour from.
Yep.
It was the same company, but they have a different mill
Yeah.
in a different state. It kind of got mixed up,
Yep.
and the flavors were coming out weird. So
Yeah. So that's
then
an
it,
excellent example. Yeah.
yeah. So all right, cool, I got it.
Cool. Okay, so we would do this for every
Every
shipment.
delivery,
Yeah.
every shipment, okay?
Okay. And then whoever's doing the receiving,
Right.
receiving clerk, employee, whatever, and they would check the bill of lading or whatever documentation you use.
Right.
Um, sure product comes from approved supplier. In the example, it says to check the cases too, so you could include that. Okay, so corrections. What do we do if the product comes from our unapproved supplier?
Well, I would have to call the supplier and find out, I guess, certificate of analysis, I guess.
So in this case, we would most likely reject the shipment.
Right. We would mean, okay, reject the shipment, okay.
Yeah, unless you were gonna go through with like the emergency approval of a supplier.
Okay.
Yeah. And then for our records, we've got this bill of lading.
Right.
And then we probably have some kind of receiving record, whatever we're documenting this procedure on, following this procedure.
Okay.
And then for verification, we're just going to review those
Review,
documents.
review the documents, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Got it.
Cool. So that's our last type of preventive control. The last section is really fast. We've got like 15 minutes and we're done. Okay. So management. We talked about reanalyzing your food safety plan. We talked about training and trend analysis. So these are the major pieces of long-term management of your food safety plan. Outside of that, you will need to sign your food safety plan when you finish it and anytime you make changes.
Okay.
And then the recall plan.
Right.
So we already talked about all the things that go in the recall plan
Right.
and what's required to be done in there. If you end up in any position where you have to destroy products, like you have to get rid of it, I just make sure that you get rid of it in a way that people don't have access to it. Like if it's unsafe for human consumption, I want to either like bury it deep in a landfill, set it on fire. Um, if it's a liquid product, people like dump it down the drain for meat. Sometimes they'll like dye
Okay,
it
for
different
our
color.
sake, the bagels would go into the garbage. I mean, the thing is, but people can take it out of the garbage, and what do I do about that?
Yeah, you want to make sure that people don't have access to the garbage. So we either lock it or we make sure that they're destroyed in a way that people will not eat it. Maybe you dye it a weird color. Maybe we dye it like blue or something that makes it look like it's bad.
Okay, maybe put water over it, it would become soil, and then nobody's gonna eat it.
Yeah, you just gotta make sure that it's in a state that nobody's gonna eat it because you would
Okay.
be legally liable.
Yes, I understand. I have some people, homeless people, they're going through my garbage container and they take all the bagels from. I've seen it time to time.
Yeah.
And God forbid something happens to them, that's gonna fall back on me, I guess. I understand.
Yeah, I know it sucks, but it's true. It's true for your packaging technically too. So just something to be aware of.
Okay.
All right. And then this is just a summary of the different sections of the regulation. So when I was talking earlier about how the requirements might be different for different companies, organizations based on the risk level and what they do, what I was talking about is that there are these different subparts of the regulation. And you could fall under modified requirements if you're considered a lower level risk. So, like before you were making $1 million, you fell under subpart D modified requirements, which meant all you had to do was submit to the FDA that you're making product, tell them that you're keeping it safe. You had to follow GMPs, which is subpart B, and then I believe I need to double check, but record keeping applies to our qualified facilities too. So that's a lot less than you have to do now, right? Now you have to do the hazard analysis and the preventive controls and the other things, the supply chain program.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I was talking about like if they just hold products, right, they only have to follow a few of the subparts and not all the things. So just something to keep in mind. Different industries, slightly different requirements. Most of them have to follow all the things, but some of them have different requirements.
Okay.
And some of them fall under different regulations. Like um, when we looked at the produce, it talked about the produce safety regulation, right? So produce falls under produce safety regulation, different from this one, so different requirements. So with that, if you have any questions, you can submit questions to the FDA Technical Assistance Network, and an FDA agent should respond. That said, right now the administration, like they're a little bit limited in time and funding and people. Um, so you will likely get a faster response from the FSPCA Technical Assistance Network, which is this one. So you can ask the FSPCA questions. And then outside of that, you're absolutely welcome to email me